At this time, we will reconvene into open session this meeting of the Arlington Independent School District Board of Trustees, April 22nd, 2021, beginning at 7:13 p.m. We will start our meeting with the open ceremony. Please join Mrs. Fowler in leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will everyone present please silence your cell phones and any electronic devices to make sure there's no disruptions? And now at this time, if you would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. So this evening, there are no programs, presentations, no administrative appointments, or public hearings. So we will go to our open forum for agenda items.
Please silence your cell phones and any.
Okay. As shared before, all persons in attendance are required to wear a mask. Speakers who are addressing the board in person, please keep your mask on. Thank you. As stated on the posted agenda, members of the public who desire to address the board regarding an item on this agenda are required to register by sending an email to the Superintendent of Schools Secretary, lbenjami@aisd.net, no later than 3 p.m. the day of the meeting. Mrs. Benjamin, do we have any requesters registered to address the board regarding agenda items?
Yes, ma'am, we have 2 that are joining virtually.
Okay. This is a routine part of the school board's agenda for regularly scheduled meetings. This segment of the meeting provides citizens with an opportunity to share their views with the trustees on items that are on the agenda tonight. It is not intended to be a discussion or a debate, and trustees will not reply to speakers. Derogatory comments aimed at an individual will not be tolerated. Personnel matters are not appropriate subjects for open forum. You will have 5 minutes to speak. Mrs. Benjamin will notify you when your time is up, and please end your presentation at that time. Are we ready for our first requested? Yes. I don't see them. Good evening. If you can hear me, you can start speaking. Don't see a picture. Okay. There is no other part. Frank, is anyone there? We're good? Okay, can you hear me? I can't hear or see. Okay.
Lisa.
Can you hear us? Okay, we can hear you, but we can't see you, but you are more than welcome to start. In just one moment, please. Our time taker has stepped away. And you don't have to be. I think that's fine. But our time taker's not here, so just give us 1 second. And I'll tell you when she's returned, okay? You're welcome. Okay, Ms. Fritz, can you hear me? Okay, so you will have 5 minutes to present to the board your public comments. I understand that you have filed multiple grievances on behalf of you and your family that are currently being considered. Since your grievances are pending, if you or your daughter speak on the same subject as your grievances during public forum, you will be deemed to have chosen under board policy F&G legal a stop, look, and listen hearing, and your F&G local grievances will be dismissed. Let me also remind you that you may not criticize or attack the character of any school official or employee during public forum, and that if you do, you will be deemed out of order and your time will immediately expire. If you choose to proceed, you may do so now and your time will start.
Can I answer to that, what you just said? Can I say something back? Because I looked at the rules myself, and I did not, I saw something about the grievances, but it mentioned that the grievance was a separate issue. It didn't mention anything what I read in the Texas statutes about the grievances. If I mention something here, that it null and voided my grievance.
Yes. Okay, hold on just one moment and your question will be addressed. Let them get to the microphone so that you can hear, okay? Okay.
We've explained the law, and the law is consistent. We don't have time right now to go through and explain further in detail each question that we may receive with regard to the grievance policy, but we have explained it properly.
Okay.
Okay.
And Ms. Fritz, if you'd like for me to repeat it one more time, I can.
No, that's okay, because I'm gonna go ahead and continue. I'm going to exercise my First Amendment rights, which is go ahead and speak about my concerns. So I will go ahead and continue with this.
Okay, so your time will start now.
Okay, thank you so much. Number 15 days to slow the spread. Today is day 402. I have been an ER nurse for 23 years, and my husband has been a paramedic and firefighter for 23 years. We have been frontline workers during SARS, swine flu, Ebola, MERS, anthrax, and now COVID-19. We come in contact with meningitis, tuberculosis, and influenza, and we have never worn masks for 12 to 24 hours straight. And we certainly haven't ever had to fight with the school district to allow our children to breathe freely. There are 128 Texas school districts with mask optional. Katy ISD, 80,000 students, and Cy-Fair with 117,000 students here recently. AISD has 60,000 students. Masks were given authorization by the FDA on April the 24th, 2020 as a medical device under the Emergency Use Authorization, EUA. Under this EUA, Federal Law 21 U.S.C. 360 BBB requires individuals to be fully informed of the risks and benefits and given the option to accept or refuse. This includes vaccine, social distancing, and PCR tests. As elected officials, you have no legal authority to unconstitutionally enforce a EUA device such as masks. You all took an oath to uphold the U.S. and Texas Constitution, yet you continue to force masks. Denied our religious exemptions twice. Did not let our children take the STAR exam. I repeat, denied our children the STAR exam without a mask and turned my husband and daughter away on 4/20. You did not let our daughter try out for soccer 2 days in a row and discriminated against her in front of her peers. Still won't let our children learn on campus, resulting in unequal access to education all year. Our youngest has an IEP, but your ARD committee continues to veto our concerns due to your policy. AISD also removed my public comments from their Facebook page, suppressing my freedom of speech multiple times, as well as other parents. On page 7, your board handbook states, trustees represent the community, not the superintendent or district, yet parents are rarely a focus in your open meetings. It also states, trustees shall strive to put the needs of children above the wants of adults, and to make decisions that promote the educational welfare of all children in the district. That is on page 7 of your board handbook. If you want to start putting the children first, then focus on the fact that kids are dying from suicide and homicide and rarely from COVID-19. Here's the data from January 2020 to April 4, 2021 off of the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's website. In Tarrant County, please keep in mind that Texas has 254 counties. There have been 29 pediatric suicides ages 12 to 18 and 30 pediatric homicides to include abuse from ages 1 to 18 for a total of 59 pediatric deaths. In the entire state of Texas, there have been 49 pediatric deaths from COVID-19 and miraculously 0 flu deaths for pediatrics. In one county, we've had more deaths from suicide and homicide for pediatrics than COVID-19 deaths for pediatrics in the entire state of Texas. And for context, there's been one pediatric flu death in the entire United States per the CDC website. So, that being said, can you tell me how much time I have left? Anybody?
1 minute and 52 seconds, Ms. Fritz.
Okay. I would like to state that in no way do my comments represent my employer, and in no way do they represent what I do, the State Board of Nursing. My comments are based upon my research, truth and fact of what I have obtained on the FDA website and CDC website. I have sent every single one of you information about, and I've copied you on the grievances. The fact that it's gotten so far that you all have denied our children the STAR exam, I don't know what it's going to take for AISD to stop and look and see what's going on here. But I will say this, I have also addressed the fact of one of your health professionals there that spoke about the variant that's coming, that's around. All of that was generalized information with no data at all, nothing, no information. Yet one of your trustees said that we'll go ahead and just keep our safety measures going and keep the mask. I don't know what's going on, but I will tell you this. As parents, we have the right to decide what we want for our children medically. And there is plenty of science showing that the masking is harmful, and there are multiple constitutional rights being violated. So I wanted to remind you all of your constitutional oaths that you all took. And I want to remind everybody that we are now it's time to go ahead and vote. Voting is for school board trustees, May 1st. And that's all I'm saying today. So my daughter, I guess, would be next.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. Yes. Ms. Fritz, can you hear me? Ms. Fritz, can you hear me? Ms. Fritz, can you hear me? Ms. Fritz, looking at the screen, it looks like you're muted on your end. If that's not purposeful, please unmute. Okay. Okay. Is Heidi ready to speak?
Yes, ma'am. I will go ahead and confirm.
Okay.
Hello?
Heidi?
Yes.
Okay, if you can hear me, you have 5 minutes to speak, and your time will start now.
Okay.
Okay.
Ever since the 6th grade, I've been looking forward to high school and my freshman year, and I lost that. My entire freshman year went down the drain before I even knew it hit me. 8th grade, spring break, the last words that I said to my friends was, "I'll see you guys after the spring break." I never got to see any of them after that day. Soccer tryouts were right after spring break, so not only did I not get to try out for 8th grade soccer, but I was turned away twice for 9th grade soccer tryouts, all because I couldn't wear a mask. And my off-campus soccer team disbanded, so I never got to play soccer on a team for the year. I lost the majority of my friends from school. All the friends I have right now I can count on my 2 hands. There's countless amounts of students' lives being ruined and mental health being deteriorated. I want to go to normal school and hang out with my friends and play soccer, and I wanted to enjoy my freshman year. When I went to try out for 9th grade soccer, I was treated as if I had the plague, and I was embarrassed in front of every other girl there, including coaches. I shouldn't be treated this way all because I can't breathe in a mask. I was even denied the STAR test due to not being able to breathe in a mask. I hope you all can make the right decision and let our school go back to normal. I was really disappointed this year, and I lost a lot. And I don't know, I really thought that, this year I'd be able to actually do all the things that freshmen can do. High school, being a freshman is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, apart from college. And I got that taken. I don't know how, the school board and other people sleep at night knowing that there's kids' lives, including mine, that have been ruined. My little brother, this was his 7th grade year. He was just going into middle school. He didn't get to see any of his friends. We had to find them ourselves. And even he can count all his friends he has now just on one hand. And my older brother, it was his senior year, and he didn't even get to go to school for that either. My birthday and my younger brother's birthday, we had to do at home. We couldn't go and see our friends and have fun at school. My brother's birthday was today, and he spent it with family, which is great, but he couldn't spend it with any of his friends. He couldn't go around having cupcakes and doing everything that 7th graders should be doing, everything that little kids should be looking forward to. So every single one of my siblings has lost something this year. I lost my freshman year, my little brother lost his 7th grade year, and my older brother is going out of high school, and it's not, the way he's leaving it is not the way he should be leaving it. He should be leaving and making memories. My younger brother should be going into 8th grade with all his friends. We should be able to be at school and be normal kids and live our lives instead of having other people make choices for us that we don't agree with. So I really hope that my sophomore year and my little brother's 8th grade year is normal so that we can actually be happy. I never would have thought that not only my 8th grade, the rest of my 8th grade year and my 9th grade year, I never thought that any of that would be taken away from me. It definitely showed me that I should be grateful to have school. I should be grateful to have all of my friends. And it shouldn't be taken for granted. And I really hope that I feel sorry for all the students and the teachers and the parents that have to go through this. But yeah, I really, really hope that this isn't the case next year. Because so many lives are being ruined right now. So many. And so many lives from students are being taken away. It's not okay. This isn't how this is supposed to be. We shouldn't be wearing masks everywhere as if we're the disease or something. And people that can't wear masks like me shouldn't be treated as if they're contagious. They should be treated normally. And we should be able to play soccer and basketball and all that other stuff and be able to actually live our lives and be ourselves without having to worry about someone calling us out.
Okay, thank you very much, Heidi. Your time is up. Okay, next on our agenda, we have 4 action items. We will start with considering resolution for a one-time modification of district policies and procedures on grade promotion. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mason. This evening, we bring a resolution for the board's consideration related to our policies and procedures for promotion. And so we covered this with the governance committee as well. And there's a one-time modification, so it comes in the form of a resolution. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Wirtz to lead us through that presentation. Dr. Wirtz.
Good evening, President Mays, Dr. Cavazos, members of the board. I want to start off by saying hello. It feels like it's been a while since I've stood at a podium in front of you live, so it's nice to see everyone's faces again. I'm here tonight to talk specifically around a resolution. It's, as it stated, a one-time resolution for modification of district policies or procedures related to grade promotion. For clarity to the board and those who may be watching, this resolution is not related to grades or grading policy in any way. It's related to promotion, moving the student from one grade level to the next, specifically in grades K through 8. And the reason I specify specifically grades K through 8 is because high school promotion typically happens through the earning of credits, not necessarily by grade level bands. So I thought I would provide initially some background, and this is not anything new for anybody, but back last spring, Governor Abbott issued an executive order GA-08, and this order specifically pertained to preparedness and mitigation that was impacting how districts respond to COVID-19. And this, when we think about policy related to grade promotion and the implications of the way we've kind of had to function over the last year, the specific one I want to reference tonight is EIE Local. In EIE Local, there is guidance specifically for how a student is to be promoted and specifically guidelines for promotion, including earning credit, and it's all based on defined mastery levels. In K through 2, it's articulated as significant mastery within the grade level for the content areas of language arts and mathematics, and those standards are articulated in the standards-based report card in each of those categories. In grades 3 through 8, it specifies mastery as something specific, such as overall average of 70 in every any star tested subject area. If a student has a grade of less than 70, but at least 65, and they pass or receive a passing score on STAR, they can substitute that score for their grade of 65 to meet qualifying criteria for promotion. And in elementary, they must also have a combined average of 70 for science and social studies. And in junior high school, students have to have an overall average of 70 in all other subject areas. As you look at this policy and the specificity that's listed there in terms of mastery, and you also consider some of the actions that have been taken by the state, it renders the policy impossible to actually deliver as spoken. This year, the Student Success Initiative, which is the requirements for students in grades 5 and 8 to pass both the reading and mathematics STAR assessments in order to be eligible for automatic promotion, even if with passing grades, was suspended for this school year. So the other thing that's important to note is that students who were participating in STAR, who chose to receive instruction solely in a virtual environment and did not come up to the school to participate in STAR, were unable to participate in the STAR exam. The state required us to offer the STAR exam, but we were unable to offer it to students who were at home who did not want to come into the building. Because of this situation, there's a lack of access for STAR testing for all students, which prevents the equitable application of the policy. And STAR scores, as I mentioned earlier, are unable to be substituted for a less than proficient grade for those students that would normally have qualified to do so. So what we're proposing tonight is a resolution that allows some more flexibility when considering whether a student is ready for promotion to the next grade level. And so what we're proposing is a process when you apply this resolution, as I'm about to share, a process that gives some guidance to schools to think about students from a more global perspective and look for something what I'm calling a preponderance of evidence. So this is an example of the process that would happen. If a student did not meet the mastery requirements as defined in EIE Local, it would trigger a committee to meet about that student. That students committee would consist of the teacher, the parent, and a leadership member of the leadership team at the school. And they would review student achievement and engagement data. They would review information related to how students have responded to intervention over the course of the school year, any educational history. And then based on that decision, that discussion, they would make a decision about whether promotion is in the best interest of the student with an intervention put in place to support them as they move to the next grade level, or whether in fact the student should be retained. This is a sample of the screenshot about what the initial front page of that process would look like for schools. And the bullets that you see there on the left are all the specific information points that the team will be required to go through. So what I'd like to emphasize is the process is intended and designed to be methodical so that every single one of those points, there's a discussion point that happens about that, including any relevant demographic information, what trends in terms of attendance the student has had over the course of the school year and in past school years. Also looking to see whether the student has been retained in the past, because some students, for example, may have already been retained in an earlier grade level, which impacts some decision-making around retention. Any health information, any information or documentation that was provided to parents in advance, notifying them that their child was struggling academically. And then all the academic information, grades, STAR scores, screener information, curriculum assessments, and any information that the teacher would have. And then, of course, we would look at any interventions that were already provided, as I mentioned earlier in the school year, and what the student's response to that intervention was, and then what their rationale for their decision point. In the document, there are 4 specific questions that talk specifically about what's the rationale for retention, what's the student's motivation, is there a reason why promotion should actually be considered. What I wanted to highlight around this resolution is what it is and what it is not. What it is really more of a holistic review of how the student has performed traditionally academically and how they're doing this year. Also, it's an opportunity for a teacher and staff to consider whether the student in fact can be successful in a future grade level if supports are put in place. And then also really to consider the significant impact that retention has. One thing that's important to note is in our board policy, it states specifically that we've been charged to reduce retention in the district and to eventually eliminate it. And so there's already a philosophy or a culture in Arlington that it's important to really utilize retention as a last resort strategy, since there is a plethora of research that articulates the fact that retention typically is a poor practice and does not work. I wanted to also emphasize, as I did at the beginning of the presentation, that this resolution would in no way impact grades and or the calculation of class rank. So our grading policy as it currently stands in place and the way that class rank is calculated will continue as normal. Students will receive numeric grades. They will be transcribed on their transcripts. And our class ranks for graduation this year and the other cohorts that are that are earlier than our seniors will all be calculated the way we have currently in policy. That will not change as it did last spring. So administration is recommending that the board adopt a resolution for a one-time modification of district policies and procedures on grade promotion. Any questions I can answer for you?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wertz. Do I have trustees with questions or comments? Ms. Fowler.
Thank you, President Mays. Don't really have a question, Dr. Wertz, but I want to say that I'm pleased that you're all taking the holistic approach. You know, a grade doesn't say everything about a child, just like the STAR test grade doesn't say everything about a child, but to be able to look back in their past performance, to look at what's been going on in their life during this time, and then make a recommendation for their future. So I like the holistic approach rather than a grade determining that child. So I appreciate that.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Ms. Walton.
Thank you, President Mays. Yes, Dr. Wertz, as an educator for many, many years in this district, I never saw too many children that benefited from being retained, and I am so glad that we have developed a culture of trying to minimize that as much as we can, even during these extraordinary times that we have been through. So the 5-page evaluation, the holistic evaluation, is very, very thorough, and I'm glad that it involves many people that have been involved with the child, and I believe in my heart they will make the best decision for each and every child based on all of this information they will have to review. So thank you and your group for taking such care with this.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Are there any other trustees with any comments and/or questions? Yes, Mr. Chapa.
Thank you, President Mays. This is something that the Governance Committee reviewed, and I had quite a few questions about it in governance. And you know, former teacher myself, and I think a concern we all had is you know, we don't want this policy change to be perceived in any way as saying that teachers can't, you know, give students the grades that mathematically they have earned. That is not the intent of this at all. So I want that intention to be clear, that this is in no way, shape, or form saying that teachers have to automatically pass a student or automatically give them a 70, or that they can't give them the grade that they deserve. They very much can. But what this does is it for students who don't get a passing grade in mandatory classes for promotion in the normal course of events, we're going to take a closer look at those students to determine whether or not the reason that they're not eligible for promotion under the existing policy is because they got the situation that they're in is indicative of the fact that they need to be retained, and are the special cases where retention may be the appropriate response. And then for the other students to recognize that this has just been such a year that we're going to take a holistic review at that student. And you know, quite frankly, if you've been in the classroom and you work with students, you know when a student is, you know, has knowledge of the material that you've been teaching, and if the reason that they're not able to successfully demonstrate that with their numerical grade is situation beyond their control in this unique circumstance that we're in for the past year, then we have to take that into account. And I was very pleased that it was only up on the screen for a little bit, but I was very impressed with the form, Dr. Wirtz, that you showed to the Governance Committee, showed here tonight, that will walk the review committee through the different aspects to look at. So it's not only a holistic review, it's not a loosey-goosey holistic review. It's here are the factors that we should consider in whether or not we should promote this student. And I feel like a lot of students who might deserve promotion and will be promoted under this policy, the fact that they have been flagged by their numerical grade is going to put them in a process where we can identify the supports that they need to be successful going forward next year. Because like you said, retention is not the appropriate solution for many, many students who just don't get the 70, especially this year. So with that, President Mays, I'd like to move to adopt a resolution. If there's no further discussion, I will need a second, and then I will read the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chapa. Do you have a second? Okay. So I've got a motion by Mr. Chapa, a second by Mrs. Walton. Justin, you can read the resolution. I got you, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you, President Mays. This is a resolution of the Arlington Independent School District Board of Trustees titled "A One-Time Modification of District Policies and Procedures on Grade Promotion." Whereas due to the outbreak of COVID-19, the normal operations of the district closed on March 16th, 2020, and the Texas governor issued Executive Order number GA08 relating to COVID-19 preparedness and mitigation, and through this action and in accordance with guidelines from the president, ordered the temporary closure of all Texas school districts. And whereas the Texas Education Agency has granted permission to suspend and alter policies to address the ongoing effects of the global pandemic on the method of delivering education in a safe and effective manner, and whereas AISD continues to be at the forefront of initiating multiple effective, unconventional instructional approaches due to limited capacity to safely resume normal campus-based instruction for an extended period of time, and the temporary suspension of or modification to certain policies and guidelines related to student promotion will ensure fairness in the process for all students. And whereas Board Policy EIE Local currently provides guidelines for promotion and course credit, including standards for mastery as reflected by course assignments, unit evaluations, and/or final exams. And whereas the Texas Education Agency has suspended student success initiative requirements for students in grades 5 and 8 to successfully pass the STAR exam in reading and mathematics to be eligible for grade promotion for the 2020-2021 school year. And whereas students in grades 3 through 8 learning in the remote environment were unable to participate in the STAR assessment remotely, preventing said students from having the opportunity to substitute a passing STAR score for less than a proficient grade, thereby meeting promotion requirements as defined in Board Policy EIE Local. And whereas Board Policy EIE Local states that the district shall establish procedures designed to reduce retaining students at a grade level, with the goal being to eliminate the practice of retaining students. And whereas Board Policy EIE Legal currently states that data used to determine a student's eligibility for promotion include demonstrated proficiency of the subject matter, the recommendation of the student's teacher, the student's grade in each subject or course, the student's score on an assessment instrument administered under Education Code Section 30.023A, B, or L, to the extent applicable, and any other necessary academic information as determined by the district. And whereas each of these one-time modifications of board policies and retention promotion procedures are intended to ensure appropriate and individualized academic responsivity to all students in light of the current unprecedented circumstances, now therefore be it resolved by the board that 1, the board determines that any requirement that a student be retained solely for failing to meet standards for mastery as defined in Board Policy EIE Local in grades K through 8 shall be suspended for the 2020-2021 school year. And 2, the board determines that a temporary modification of Board Policy EIE Local shall be implemented to allow for students not meeting standards for mastery to be considered for possible promotion to the following grade level based on a preponderance of evidence to include but not be limited to grades, attendance, unit final exam assessment scores, curriculum assessments, state assessments, academic screener information, response to intervention information, parent and teacher input, and any other relevant information. And 3, the board determines that based on a student's overall academic performance and engagement during normal instruction, as well as virtual instruction, teachers, parents, and administrators will collaboratively determine whether a student has mastered a sufficient portion of the grade level course curriculum to be promoted with appropriate intervention support or if retention is needed. And 4, the board hereby ratifies any previous acts and further authorizes the superintendent to take any other actions necessary to fulfill the purpose of this resolution and ensure the appropriate grade level placement for all students during the 2021 school year, and the authority granted by this resolution for the remainder of the 2020-2021 school year, unless the board takes further action.
Do I see any other discussion? Seeing none, let's all vote. Okay, all have voted in the affirmative, and the motion passes. Thank you very much, Justin, to you and your governance board committee, also set on by Ms. Polly Walton and Dr. Rush. Our next item on the agenda is another action item. Consider policy change from Board Policy GKB Local and Board Policy GKD Local. Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Mays, and we bring this policy revision to the board's consideration today. And this policy revision will align to allow us to activate our facilities, specifically the Visual and Performing Arts Center. And when I mention activate, it's to be able to rent those facilities appropriately, book different events and things like that that are outside of our school district. So we knew when we built those facilities, the board's intention was also to be a partner with the community and rent those facilities and make it a community facility as well, serving our students first, of course. And so this policy revision allows us to do those things. And this has also been reviewed by the Governance Committee. I'll turn it over to Dr. Hill for a presentation. Dr. Hill.
Hey, so President Mays, board members, and Dr. Cavazos, again, thank you for setting the frame for that policy revision. And so just a little background, as he's already said, with the opening of the CVPA, the district has the opportunity to make this space available to rent for for-profit organizations and events. Currently, our policy prohibits rentals for for-profits. Policies being considered are GKB Local, which deals with community community relations and advertising, and GKD local, which deals with community relations and non-school use of school facilities. So the revisions being discussed for GKB adds language to this policy that allows promoters and tour managers of for-profits to advertise and market their rental occasion. It also gives, I think this is an important piece here, gives the district the final right to accept or reject that proposed advertisements that do not adhere to our standards within the district. GKD adds language to this policy that permits for-profit organizations to use our district facilities with an agreed-upon agreement or contract. You have these policies, just a little bit of the visual of the language that's being added to the policies and or revised within the policies, and you can see there for GKB and GKD, again, dealing with the contract adjustments. Contracts and use of terms, we are in the process of revising or drafting some procedures and contracts for use of the facilities and other terms, and so that will accompany this policy, but they are not finalized at this time. So it is administration's recommendation that the board approve these revisions to GKB local and GKD local as presented. And at this time, we'll be happy to answer any questions or discuss it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hill. Are there any trustees with questions or comments? Mrs. Fowler?
Thank you, President Mays. Dr. Hill, I want to make sure that, first of all, that AISD always has first dibs
Of
on the
course,
center.
yes.
And I think you mentioned that. And what about liability statements? Will there be something in the contract where if something happens to someone during the rental use, that it doesn't come back on the ISD?
Yes, ma'am, that's a part of we're in the process of drawing those contracts up to make sure that they cover all of those concerns and to make sure that the district's protected.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. I just want to assure the rest of the board and anyone listening that our new Fine Arts Center is certainly a stellar place and should be a wonderful way for the community to share with this change in our policies and so forth. Proud Mama alert. I heard the Lamar Orchestra perform in that hall yesterday, and it was so wonderful. The wonderfulness, I know that's not a word, of that hall was so fabulous that it made the orchestra better. The kids, the young people in the orchestra rose to a different level after they had rehearsed for a little while in that hall. It was quite something to behold. So I'm so glad we're going to share this with others, this space with others, with being able to do that with this policy change. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Mr. Hogg?
Thank you, President Mays. Dr. Hill, why does it specifically say promoters and tour managers? Why is that wording used?
And in conversation with Dr. Christopher Anderson and Mr. Bryant, who's the director of those facilities, that's language and lingo that's used in that industry, and they wanted to make sure that the language and the policy reflected what was in that industry. Tour managers and promoters, they are the ones who bring in the artists and things of that nature. So,
Are there others that do that also, and are we just limiting it to them?
no, it could be others, and I'm sure.
Seems very narrow on our two terms right there. And then let me ask, why is this just for this, in essence, location? What about for the athletic center and the natatorium?
And so if you will see that I don't think we spell out any specific facility in the policy. It would be open to all facilities, but it's really driven by.
So does promoters and tour managers cover anyone who's organizing the NCAA Division III national swim competition? That's why I asked the question about promoters and tour managers as verbiage.
I'm not sure as who would be the contact person for a venue like, for an event like that, but we could definitely look at
Can you scroll up? It's a little small on the deck that I'm showing. Can you go back to the screen with the actual verbiage? Sorry, I guess I could inflate my screen a little bit or zoom in. Or my eyes are getting a little older. I guess I'm still confused why we specifically listed promoters and tour managers, because in our policy then, if someone's not a promoter or tour manager, they can't request this.
Okay. That's something we can definitely take a look at. I don't think that we want to be restrictive of those others that may be, and so maybe it's an opportunity for us to widen that a little bit more in policies.
Mr. Chapa,
Yeah,
I'll let you chime in.
Sure,
Who'd like
I'd love to,
piggyback?
yeah, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so, Dr. Hill, can you go back to the prior screen just for a second to make sure, or the other one, the other red line? Okay, so the main, Mr. Hogg, the main thrust of this policy change as presented in Governance Committee was that under the board's prior policy, it was very restrictive in our ability to rent out any facilities for for-profit use. So the main goal of this policy change is to make it to where we can have for-profit uses of these facilities. And in this page, that's the primary change under the section titled for-profit use. So Dr. Hill, if you'll go to the next page, or the next page on the red line, thank you. This particular section is titled advertising, and this language is specifically about as an adjunct to promotional activities. And so if a promotional activity has the approval of a superintendent or designee, I think that's sufficient. This was particular language in the advertising section that Dr. Anderson asked to be included, is my understanding. And I don't think anything, if there is a concern as whether or not the NCAA would be considered, to fall under this particular sentence that was added to the advertising policy, I think anyone that wants to put on and advertise an event at the facility would be within the definition of a promoter. I don't think there'd be anything that would restrict
Yeah,
that.
so is any marketing agency considered a promoter?
Yeah, I mean, it says promoters or tenured managers may request services of preferred third-party marketing or advertising firms. So whoever is hosting the event, anybody they wanted to bring in to do marketing or advertising, I think would fall under the
I guess I'm
letter
still
policy.
confused why we need the word promoters and tour managers.
I mean,
Why can't
that
we
was
just say-
language that was
Why
requested
couldn't we
from the
just
staff
say
who
approved
host.
third-party entities may request the services?
That was not the recommendation from staff. I don't think there's anything in this policy change that would prevent, if I understand where your concern is from any of the language here would prevent your concern from being addressed, because those are all promotional activities that, as long as they have prior approval of the superintendent or designee, would be able to be done.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to let Dr. Reich wanted to piggyback off of the piggyback of the piggyback.
Yeah, sure. We can all piggyback. I'm interested.
So I appreciate the conversation. Perhaps what we can do here, for whatever reason, there was that specific request to have this specific wording in here. To your point, Mr. Hogg, if everybody is okay with this, perhaps we can just edit this to say entities including but not limited to, and then continue. That way it's broad-based, all-encompassing, covers everything.
I'd be fine with that. And listen, y'all know I will do it. The more revenue we can bring in, the better it is for the taxpayers, the bigger it is for our district across the board. I just want to make sure we're not limiting. We do always have to be cautious and protect our buildings, because certain groups that can come in can cause issues. It may not project the image we want as a district, and it can also cause potential harm to our facility and cost us more money in the long run. So, but I'm also going to always promote as this district of how we can generate revenue at the exact same time when it's not being used by our students, or for times when it's good. It's a great thing for our students that may have access to it. So I'm always for that. I just don't want this to be limiting.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that change too. I mean, I don't think anything here would inhibit that consideration at all. I mean, this specific line that we're talking about is related to someone who hires a third-party marketing and advertising firm to produce content related to time-sensitive ticket sales. So it's limited to ticket sales, but I mean, I don't have any problem changing it to be clear that this is anyone that we might bring in who might want to use a third-party entity to do ticket sales. I think that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Wilbanks, is this in conjunction to what we're talking about now? Do you have another question? Okay.
Yeah, I also don't have a problem with adding that. I would say that based on the fact that this is in the advertising section, talking about advertising, the word promoters would be broad enough to cover anyone. In the other section, as Mr. Chapo pointed out, that takes the previous limitations and makes it open to anyone for-profit, allows, I think, covers Mr. Hogg's concerns. And then this being related to just people who are doing marketing, i.e. promoting, would cover the NCAA or any other examples that we've come up in terms of their marketing those tickets. So, but again, I think Dr. Reich has come up with a nice
I think it's fine.
addition that
Listen, as long as the
doesn't change
intent
anything.
for our policy is there and we can go back and track the intent. If we change it, Dr. Reich, I'm fine. If we leave it, but we have the intent that it's open for anyone, and if our interpretation of promoters is anyone who's been approved by the district to allow them to market, that's great, but I do think those two words were, for some reason, very specific. I don't understand why they're very specific, so I don't really feel they're necessary.
Okay. Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. Let me assure you, I only talked about the actual concert hall, but you mentioned something about taking care of the building, and I felt very secure. There were health screeners at the entrance. There were security personnel in several locations and ushers. So the place is being well looked after by our extended staff in that facility.
Okay, so this is an action item. We've stated some changes, so do I have a motion? Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. Yes, I'd like to move to approve the revisions to Board Policy GKB Local and GKD Local as amended and discussed.
And I will second pending the amendments from Dr. Resch. Is that the intent, Ms. Walton?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Dr. Reich, if you don't mind, if you turn on, I'd just like for you to repeat what you said so we make sure we get it for the minutes and the record.
Yeah, so that amendment would be adding entities including but not limited to, and then carrying on with the rest of the red line.
That's fine.
Okay, so I've got,
That a promoter might not be an entity.
We don't know, that's why we're doing this. Just covering the bases.
That I mean, if it's an individual, if we say entities including but not limited to promoters, then including but not limited to promoters would be a modification of the word entity. And so the promoters and tour managers referenced in the policy would therefore have to be entities, is what I'm saying. Everybody hates the lawyer, but here I am. So let's, let me.
so for just one moment, we've got a motion.
I have a proposal. Can we, this is just discussion, can we change it to just say the service, eliminate the phrase promoters and tour managers may request the services of, and just say the services of preferred third-party marketing and advertising firms may be used to produce content related to time-sensitive ticket sales.
So Mr. Chopper, you're just eliminating, in essence, promoters and tour managers may request. It says the services of preferred third-party marketing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, may be used to produce content related to time-sensitive, yes.
So it's just eliminating the first 1, 2, 3, 4.
Eliminating the first one,
Five
and then, yes, and then adding the services of preferred third-party marketing and advertising firm. Make that firms may be used to produce content.
Okay, yes, Mr. Ackerbaum.
Madam President, because we are not required under our policy to follow Robert's rules, you can either move to amend the amendment of the original motion, or if the board has a consensus, you can just take the current offer and move forward with that. I would just suggest that you have someone be the motion maker of the most current, whomever that chooses to be, and then someone second it, and we just proceed from there, if that's the board's preference.
Well, can we just amend with a unanimous consent?
Yeah, and Mr. Eckelbaum, we're not required, but our board has agreed to try and follow Robert's Rules of Orders. So,
Okay, then Robert's rules would be, we vote to, on the first amendment, or the last amendment, which
Wait,
or
there wasn't a-
changes-
Mr. Chapa
There
could
wasn't a
just
second.
make that recommendation. Couldn't Ms. Walton amend her original motion?
there was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was a motion, and then there was an amendment, and now he's amending or altering the amendment. Was there a second to the amendment, I guess is the question.
There was a-
No, Ms. Walton made the original motion with the amendment in it.
Right.
Okay, so then this is the only amendment, because
I will, yes.
her original motion really wasn't an amendment.
Amendment, it was just a, okay.
Okay,
So
so we
then-
vote on the amendment.
All right,
and
so
then
now
we
I
vote.
will move to amend the motion.
We'll need a second for that amendment.
Should I read it first? Okay. So I move to amend the language to eliminate the words promoters and tour managers may request, so that the language that is now in red should read, the services of preferred third-party marketing and advertising firms may be used to produce content related to time-sensitive ticket sales,
Okay,
and retain the remainder of the change.
okay, so we have a first and a second to amend the original motion. Yes, for unanimous consent from Mr. Chapa and Mr. Wilbanks for the second.
You have to confirm that there's unanimous consent by voting.
I can't hear you.
You have to confirm that there's unanimous consent by voting
Oh.
on the amendment.
Right, I was still reading it, wasn't I?
Just have them raise your hand and vote.
Okay, so, yes, please, if you are in agreement of amending the original motion, please raise your hand. No.
No.
Dr. Rush?
No, my point of dissension, I guess, is the promoters and tour managers, I don't have enough information as to, the administration was very specific and kind of adamant on those terms, and I don't want to take a step too far at this point in eliminating it in case there's some reason that level of specificity exists.
Right.
So I wouldn't support that at this time. I'd rather take it back to committee and give administration the opportunity to provide more clarity to bring it back, unless it is time sensitive, which I think we've got time.
Yeah, and that was going to be my question as well, because it was noted, Mr. Chair and Dr. Hill, that for whatever reason, those were specific descriptions. Yes, Mr. Chapa?
That's fine. So if I have the floor, I would move to refer this back to the government committee for further consideration.
Okay, so,
And there's a
okay.
second.
So we have a motion by Mr. Chapa, a second by Mr. Wilbanks to amend the first motion.
No.
Okay, so we don't have to go back to the first motion.
You do not,
Okay.
this would take priority of referring it back to the committee over the original motion, so you vote on whether or not to
Okay.
refer it back.
Okay, so I have a motion by Mr. Chapa, a second by Mr. Wilbanks to take this action back to committee.
In essence, tabling the motion.
Yes,
Yes.
so we will be tabling this motion. We need to vote. I don't know if we're going to have a voting screen up. If we're not, we can vote by hand. We do, okay. So we need to vote. Everybody, please vote. Okay, so we've got 6 yes, 1 no. So motion passes, and this will go back to committee. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Eichelbaum / Robert. Okay, next on our agenda is action item C. Consider sale and resolution to approve the sale of delinquent tax property described as .21 acres, more or less, abstract 1580, J.T. Turner Survey, located in the city of Arlington, Tarrant County, Texas, also known as 3700 West Green Oaks Boulevard, Arlington, Texas. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mason. We bring this consideration for sale of this property, of delinquent tax property, as you described, for your consideration.
Dr. Reich.
Thank you, President Mays. I move that the board approve the resolution to sell the delinquent tax sale property located at 3700 West Green Oaks Boulevard as presented.
Okay, I have a motion by Dr. Reich. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Fowler. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All voted unanimously in the affirmative. The motion passes. Our next action item is consider appointments to the Financial Futures Committee. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mason. We have two opportunities to appoint, for the board to appoint members to the FFC due to some changes in the original individuals who were interested. So this time I'll ask Ms. Fowler to, as the chair of the Community Engagement Committee, to lead us through that. Ms. Fowler.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. First of all, I want to thank people that are serving on our committees, the volunteers. They give a lot of time and insight, and it's very important information that we need, and we appreciate their input. For the Financial Futures Committee, I move to appoint April Nohinick from Martin High School and Trelane Wilson from Sam Houston to fill the two open positions on the Financial Futures Committee.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Dr. Reich, second. So a motion by Mrs. Fowler, a second by Dr. Reich. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All present voting in the affirmative, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda are discussion action items. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mason. This evening we bring a school operations update to give the board an opportunity to receive an update on school operations, as we're now have entered the last 6 weeks of school for this school year. And so we will continue with providing these updates. So Dr. Brown, take us through this.
Thank you. Good evening, President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos. As usual, thank you for the opportunity to be able to share a brief school operations update with you, and my partner, Dr. Wirtz, will also have part of our conversation today. As usual, we do begin with our guiding principles that have governed really pretty much our work during this pandemic, and of course, prioritizing the health and safety of our students and our staff members, making sure that we're extending and asking for flexibility and grace still continues to be important. Ensuring educational equity and access to rigorous learning, no matter if students are learning at home or they're learning in person. And last but not least is valuing stakeholder input as we continue to make important decisions for our district. So today we have three brief topics. The first one, of course, providing an in-person learning update for you. Also update on our AISD and Tarrant County COVID data. And Dr. Wirtz will close our conversation today, providing you an update with about virtual and hybrid school for the 21-22 school year. So as we talk about daily in-person learning, we've been really persistent about ensuring that we try to get as many students back into our classrooms as possible to engage in in-person learning. And so far, since the beginning of the six weeks, which did begin April 13th, we've had almost 67% of our students attending in-person learning. That actually went up another point today. So we're actually at close to 68% of our students since the beginning of the six weeks. And we do attribute this to a couple of reasons. One, we launched Operation Reconnect, which we talked about that with you all a few weeks ago. And this really it was not really a new process in terms of reaching out to parents and students who've not been present, but really those kids who had extended absences. The schools really made a concerted effort to make contact, whether it's in-person home visits or phone calls to be able to connect with those parents and students to try to get them back engaged. So since we began Operation Reconnect, which was about 4 weeks ago, our schools have logged over 10,000 phone calls to parents of students who had excessive absences, and over 400 home visits by administrators, staff members of the school, again, to try to make that face-to-face contact with many of our parents and students who might be disengaged for various reasons. So we believe that's one aspect of the work. We also have had lots of success stories. Our principals and campus teams have really tried to take out all the stops, if you will, to try to encourage our folks to come back, especially for this last 6 weeks of school. We know it's really important that we close strong as we end the school year, because that's going to be indicative of how we begin the school year as well. So we've had many success stories. I just wanted to highlight a few of these for you this evening. One is Rankin Elementary. They had about 120 students who had some absence concerns over the last few months. So they really said, let's just do a 2-week in-person restart to try to engage our students back in school, make sure they have access to the learning management system, they have the resources they need. And we were very excited to see they have gone from 329 to over 400 students now who are in person. Johns Elementary School had 47 students on their Operation Reconnect list who had excessive absences. From there, we have 37 of those now returning to in-person learning. Sometimes that contact from people that you know at the school makes all the difference in the work that we're engaging in. Sam Houston High School, through Operation Reconnect, they've contacted over 350 students who have excessive absences. They make it a point during their daily and conversations with admin and weekly admin team meetings to talk about specific students who are in danger of not graduating, for example, or we need to get back into the school. And these are just a few cases of schools who've done an amazing job of really trying to reconnect with our parents and students. South Davis have logged over 10,000 contacts over the course of this year. They are at about 98% attendance, which is amazing. 407 to 600 students in person. So this represents just a few of the many success stories that our campuses, the teams have been committed to trying to do our best to re-engage our students during this challenging time. So now just to transition to our AISD COVID data and talk to you about Tarrant County data as well. Of course, our monitor is updated every single Tuesday afternoon, So we have that updated, our dashboard, to make sure that we have current information about student and staff cases. And so as of Tuesday, we had 4 active staff cases and 32 student cases. And you can see I just put the arrows there so that you can see where we have an uptick or there's been a downward trend. And again, none of those have been significant, either up or down, something to note. But our data mirrors the week of March 1st. And that was something that our health services team wanted to highlight, that there's not really been a shift one way or the other. It's really pretty much staying about stable. And so since our last board update, we've had about 56 confirmed cases. 15 of those were symptomatic, resulting in about 406 quarantined staff and students. Again, our teams at the campuses and our departments are really just trying to still be, continue to be as purposeful as possible with our protocols and ensuring that we continue to mitigate the spread as much as possible. Our AISD COVID Rapid Testing Center is still up and going. We've had an uptick in the last week of testing. We've tested over 100 tests since the last board update a couple of weeks ago. Only one positive result, but Nurse Minnerly does say that there have been some false negatives, which others have tested positive once they go to the doctor. But that team is still there, ready to assist any way we can to make sure that we can test as quickly as possible and get data to our staff and students. Moving on to Tarrant County metrics for safer in-person instruction. Again, our community spread, continues to be at the moderate level, and our 7-day moving average positivity rate is at 7%. It's kind of going crazy there. Our virus spread is about 1,573 cases as of April 17th, and that 7-day moving average for COVID-like illnesses is at about 2%, and hospitalizations remain steady at about 3% as of April 20th. All right, so that's all that we have for our COVID update. I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Dr. Wirtz, and he's going to provide an update on Virtual and Hybrid Schools Accelerator. Dr. Wirtz.
All right, good evening. So as we move into the next school year, there's some interest in considering how to provide flexibility and opportunities for students who want to continue to learn in a virtual environment. And as you're aware, there are several bills currently on the legislative floor that are being considered during this legislative session that's related to remote learning and its relationship to average daily attendance that's calculated for schools. This is just a sampling of 4 of those specific bills. And I want to preface my comments to say that while there are opportunities that we're looking into, all of it is contingent upon the fact that a legislative action must happen. So these are 2 potential virtual school models that we are considering. One is virtual school, which is completely 100% online, and that would be available for students potentially in grades 3 through 12. Students who choose this environment would be able to take all of their courses in the virtual setting, and it would in essence be asynchronous learning with very strategic, routine, synchronous instruction points for small group instruction, for example. It's also important to note that this is the only model of the 2 that will be offered as a potential for grades 3 through 6. And the reason that that's the case is because the learning blocks in elementary are not equally separated like they are in secondary. So for example, the periods in high school are all 90 minutes. We don't teach that way in elementary. There are 120 minutes for English language arts, 90 minutes for math. And so there's no way for a student to come and go in these equal blocks of time because schedules vary by teacher. So for elementary, it'll be 3 through 6 would only be offered this one option. The second option is, we're calling it blended. TEA refers to it as hybrid. We're making some choices to change the phrasing just because it's confusing for people since hybrid meant something different for high school. But in essence, this would be offered for grades 7 through 12, and this is for students who want to take only a portion of their courses online. And the best way I can describe this is when we all went to college, we got to choose what course we wanted to take and the environment in which we wanted to learn. And some of us took a class here and there virtually, and other times we came face-to-face. That's in essence what this model is. It would give students the chance to come to school face-to-face and choose to take 1 or 2 or a couple of their courses online. It's also important to note that when students are engaged in this environment, teachers who are selected to participate in this instruction will only be providing instruction in the environment in which the kids are in. So right now we have concurrent teaching going on where a teacher teaches face-to-face students and has online students simultaneously being taught. In this situation, in either of these 2 models for next year, that will not be the case. If a teacher is teaching virtual students, the entire class will be virtual at that time. If they're face-to-face, they'll be all face-to-face. They won't be doing both at the same time. It is possible, however, that a teacher could have both types of student groups on their roster. So for example, if I am a teacher that teaches algebra, and I may have 4 sections face-to-face and 2 sections virtual, but I won't be mixing those 2 groups. In anticipation of this possibility, TEA has opened up an application for Virtual and Hybrid Schools Accelerator Program. And in essence, what that does is it permits a district who's selected to partner with an outside group to help us in accelerating our plan to implement either of these 2 models. This actual process we've engaged in, and we've submitted our application. We actually had our interview with TEA today. They're going to be selecting 50 institutions or organizations to participate, and we will be notified of their decision by May 17th. Because of the delay from TEA in terms of getting this started, which they're legally not able to go any faster because they're waiting also for legislation, we on our end have started the process of designing so that we're prepared for that person, that group of or vendor to come work with us. What the Virtual Schools and Hybrid Schools Accelerator is, it's an opportunity to really think about how to design this environment for kids to ensure their experience is high quality. And so the partner that we would work with, should we be selected, will help us really think about how to make sure that the experience students are having is high quality and research-based, what kind of staffing models need to be considered to do it effectively, how to facilitate strong family engagement and a strong school culture for students who are actually learning from away from the brick and mortar building. Also will help us as we work on providing training to teachers and leaders and really trying to be proactive and responsive to make sure that students have access to all the wraparound and support services that they typically would have available to them if they were actually learning in person. They will also work with us to help us analyze and use our data to ensure that the instruction that's being provided in the virtual environment is differentiated for the individual learner. And it will give us also access over the next school year, a direct line of support to TEA as we implement the model. Right now we have a task force that's already started this process. We actually initiated the thinking around this idea back in the early part of the semester. And we're really thinking about our work around kind of a three-legged stool, three prongs of thinking, so to speak. One is around the learning experience that our students are having, one is around the whole child supports, and one is around how we provide structure and guidance for students who are learning from home. And the work that we're doing is really focused around the effective school framework levers that I know you've heard Dr. Brown share with you multiple times, and they're listed there. And when we work with our vendor or TEA that would support us in our planning process, their support will primarily come around the first three, which is around strong school leadership and planning, effective and well-supported teachers, and a positive school culture. And like I said, that will begin in May should we be accepted. The last point I wanted to mention is that it's important for us to know as we plan what the interest level is in our community. And so we will be launching a survey, a very simple survey, to the parents of students across our district in grades 3 through 12 to understand what their interest level is. And this survey will be very basic. It basically will ask them simple questions such as, are you interested in taking any of your coursework online? Yes or no? If yes, how would you like to do all of your courses or some of your courses? And if they answer some of your courses, we're asking pretty much which subject areas or bands or strands of subjects are you interested in taking your courses in so that we can plan. The important thing to note is if a student chooses a totally virtual environment and they're sitting in high school, we are going to have to design basically a skeleton graduation plan that would allow a student to take courses over the course of their 4 years to meet graduation requirements. But what students will have to know is that their course loads will be limited. We will not be able to offer every course that we have in this system and every elective online because of how teachers teach groups of kids. We can't have like one on plan having courses where there's like one student here and one student there. So it's important as we design that we make sure we design courses that are for kids where we know interest actually lies. And so we'll be launching that survey in May probably. So that's what we're working on, and any questions that either myself or Dr. Brown can answer for you, preferably Dr. Brown.
Yes, Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President May. So just a quick addition here to Dr. Wertz's presentation. So we know, and you said this at the beginning, but I think it's important to reinforce, the state will have a lot to say about what we can and can't do with virtual instruction in the fall. And that unfortunately will not come probably until the end of May. TEA is working through this process, a very strong process, by the way, to support schools that are interested. So these combinations and the things you heard tonight are being explored. They're being planned for. What we do know, and I don't know if Dr. Wertz mentioned it, but what we do know is that we will have teachers teaching virtual courses and not trying to do that concurrent, face-to-face and virtual. And we've said that several times, but I think it's important to surface that again. So if we have virtual courses, we'll have teachers specifically for the virtual courses, and they won't be doing it concurrently. However, if a teacher wants to teach a virtual class first period and a face-to-face second period, then they may be teaching, but they won't be teaching those two things at the same time, if that makes sense. So different models, it's exploratory, but the clock is ticking. Whatever restrictions TEA or the state legislature puts on this, then we will have to adapt to that, such as prerequisites and things like that, or blend it. They may insist that any virtual instruction still needs to have some face-to-face in the school. So we'll adapt to that. So it's a challenge right now, but I think it's an important opportunity for our students to have as appropriate, right? Virtual learning is not for every student. And so part of this discussion also includes a survey that we'll be sending out to determine interest so that we can continue to plan the appropriate model. Ultimately, when the state puts the rules together, we'll have better clarity on that. Just wanted to make reinforce those points. So, thank you, President Mays.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. Mrs. Fowler?
Thank you, President Mays. Dr. Wertz, a couple of questions. So you mentioned that teachers may have, 2 classes virtual and 5 classes in person. Will those teachers be given the option? I know there are some teachers that have not loved the virtual. So will they be told that you have to teach this many and this many? Or will they be given the option of saying, no, I want to do all in person?
That's a really good question. So they will. Right now, what we will be doing is working with HR to establish parameters on how teachers are selected. What we will not have is just, for example, a principal just tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, you're going to be doing virtual. There will be an application, a process for people to be selected who we know are proficient in the skill set and are actually interested in doing it.
Good.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure of that. Thank you. Also, let's say a student decides that he or she wants to take 2 or 3 classes virtually and then the others in person. Can they change? Can they change their mind?
So yes, and that's a really good question too, and that's some of the details that we have to work out because we do know that some students are not necessarily ideal for the environment. So some of the work we're doing on the front side, and we have a principal, some of the lead principals are working with us on this, is developing what is a profile of a highly successful virtual student. What are the qualities and characteristics that you want to think about, whether you, as you self-evaluate the student themselves or the parents as they think about the process? And then what do we do when a student's not being successful? How do we monitor their success? And what are their options if they're not being successful? In essence, what it basically boils down to is we want kids to be successful. If a student is not doing well in the virtual environment, we're going to invite them back to school if that's the best thing for them, because we just want them to have an ideal learning experience. We're indifferent about what environment they're doing it in. That's really their choice.
Will there be a limit of how many times they can change their mind?
That's
I can see them coming to school and then saying, no, I want to do that in
Yeah.
a few weeks, and then coming back.
Yeah, it will be a lot more structured. There won't be this there won't be opportunities for kids to flip back and forth, because what we'll do in essence, it will shift their entire schedule, because every time they go to a different environment, it will require a completely different teacher. So their sections would have to change, their course schedules would change. So it's going to be a lot more structured than you would necessarily have seen during this situation. But ideally, there won't be lots of back and forth. But if a student is not being successful, there will be a process in place for the counselor and teachers to think about that and whether to make a recommendation about if they should come back to school, and if so, when.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last question, will there be a certain number of students to make a virtual class make? I know at TCC, we have to have a certain number, whether it's virtual or in person, to meet that number, whether that class makes or not. So is there a number for the virtual?
We don't have that defined yet, but there will have to be, simply as part of staffing. And that kind of got to the question I was the point I was making a little bit earlier, which is why we want to do a survey and understand where to build our courses, because if we have kids that are interested in, one person's interested in this course and one's interested in that course, it's not a sustainable staffing model. And so we will eventually land on what that can look like. But as Dr. Cavazos indicated, it's super exploratory right now. And so until we know what the interest is, which courses we actually think we're going to be designing, how big the average class size is, we haven't really created the actual formula yet, but we will end up eventually doing that.
Great information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Mr. Wilbanks?
Thank you, President Mays, and thank you, Dr. Wertz. I know this is very fluid based on where the legislation is and what the TEA's developing. Where do we know with our legislative consultant what the most likely outcomes from the legislature are going to be? I think one of the bills is expanding the virtual, the traditional virtual school network that the state ran with grandfathered in districts, and it sounds like what the first option, the virtual school, is similar to what is it, Grapevine Colleyville that does a virtual school now is offering. Is that the model for that particular modality that you're looking at?
That was one of the districts that we looked at when we initiated the investigation or the research about where models were out there, what success levels were districts having. We did look at that one. I can't say for certain that that's exactly where we're going to land, but it is a model that we elevated to examine.
Yeah, and weren't they one of the few in the existing virtual school networks that was successful?
Right, and the interesting thing about the virtual school network that's at the state level, that even students today could enroll in, is it's a little different because there are different courses offered by different districts around the state, and attendance that the ADA that a district receives for that student is based on their successful completion of the course, not on the actual attendance that they participate in. So I suspect that when we get through legislation, it's going to be a little bit more defined for more individuality in terms of districts for receiving funding to support students as they're attending, not necessarily waiting for course completion, but we're not positive yet.
Yeah, so am I right in assuming that option is close to that existing model that you're looking at? In essence, we'll be providing a online school, and will that be open to other students from other districts to
So
enroll in?
that's also a good question. So in essence, yes, it's a virtual school. Would be like the way I would best describe it, the way we're kind of planning it is have a school, take the brick and mortar down. So it's a unit.
So
that
just
will
like
be
the
led by a leader.
volleyball
And
model.
exactly. In terms of the question about whether other people can enroll, it's really up to legislation. There's some discussion about limiting districts' abilities to enroll students from other districts into their system in a virtual-only environment, because some smaller districts are also concerned about losing student populations. But we don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet because legislation hasn't passed. But that's a topic that's, I think, highly discussed right now at the state level, specifically around this topic about the loss or gain of students across school district boundaries.
Okay. Yeah, and I haven't really been paying attention to those, that set of legislation, but I'll be sure to do so. Now, on the blended option, so you know, I'm thinking about the high school student who might want to take Latin, which isn't really offered but at one high school now.
We have it at Arlington.
We used to have it at Lamar.
Yeah, we have it maybe at one or two. I think
Right.
it's very limited.
So would that be an option so that a student at Sam Houston who wanted to take Latin could log into a class that we decided, hey, we maybe not have enough students to make Latin at any one high school, but we can certainly offer it virtually. And then for the student, you know, say it's a freshman, we don't want the freshman to go to campus and then turn around, drive home, and then take Latin or do Latin in off time. Will they just have a period at school to do that blended, or am I way off the mark here?
No,
Is that
so
not-
these are some of the questions we still have to answer. So one of the big questions we're trying to answer is, if a student chooses to take only a couple of courses, but the rest of their day is in school and they are transported by a bus, where do those students go during the day when they can't go home? And that's not an answer that we have today. We're still trying to answer that question. In terms of the question that you asked around Latin, for example, we will not be promoting or trying to facilitate a concurrent course. So if there is a class at Lamar that's happening in person and a student wants to do it virtually into that class, we're probably not going to be doing that because that's one of the core models we're trying to get away from is the concurrent instruction. The student would have to be physically there if they're doing it. If there are enough students who are interested in Latin to warrant us creating a virtual course and they come from many schools and they're going to take that one course together, that we could offer.
Yeah, and I could see the necessity to provide a classroom where you have multiple students taking multiple classes virtually across the district going for that period so that they're not having to go home. They can go to their virtual classroom to do their virtual work, similar to how our concurrent model works now for those that are going in person.
Yeah, so if a student is in a virtual school, meaning they're staying completely at home, then there would be no need except if they want to come participate in extracurricular. But if a student is doing a schedule that's blended, meaning they have some in person and some online, then we will have to designate a location or a place in the building where they are where they're able to do their class. And also try to provide some flexibility on what that looks like, because that is the point of a virtual environment. You know, if you were to have opportunities to visit some schools that are really innovative and modern in the way that they're designed, which many of our new buildings are looking that way, there are actually pockets of places for kids to congregate and learn that are outside of a typical learning environment. The thing is that we still have to design like where that would be, how that would look, how they're supervised, that kind of thing. But yes, the intent is that they stay at the campus in some way.
Good,
Yeah.
good. And then my final comment, and this is maybe a use case that you've thought of, is as my colleagues know, I had a daughter when she was in high school to develop a very chronic pain condition and kept her at home, and we looked at homebound, but since she was needing to take advanced calculus and advanced physics classes, that was not an option for her. And she was able to go to Venture. She wasn't able to take her calculus, but she was able to get through close to calculus, at least, to still take advanced mathematics, and it was a godsend for her. I'm thinking of students like that maybe for whatever reason, medically or mentally or for some other reason, a traditional school's not an option. We will, it sounded like from your description that right now the plan is to provide a graduation plan that is pretty basic. So would that also preclude someone who has in need of advanced academics to take a calculus, AP, BC calculus in the virtual school?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't necessarily. My comment didn't necessarily reference the level of work the student will be doing, meaning general education versus advanced academics. Which courses are actually selected that would be part of that continuum in terms of course selection that they can choose from would be really based on interest. So we will identify a specific set of courses that we know will meet all the graduation requirements if a student wanted to go from beginning to end, freshman to senior year, all online. And it could include general ed courses, it could include advanced academic AP classes, it could even include IB classes if there was enough volume to create a course. But if there wasn't a volume to create the course, then we can't offer every class that way. One thing I would say though is there's a silver lining to this experience we've all had, and it's changed the way that we have thought about education. And I'm kind of excited about it because I actually said this to principals today. Often education is the last one to the party, and we should be the first in the party when it comes to innovative thinking. And Venture High School is a good example of how this is really helping in terms of thinking about ways to reach kids who don't necessarily want to learn in a traditional way, but also don't necessarily need to be at the school. They are already doing asynchronous learning well before we ever started using packets.
Oh, yeah,
but now we can do it in a much more effective and
much
rigorous
richer way.
Yes,
Richer and rigorous way. So yes, I've been watching things at Venture, and there are a number of silver linings that have come out. This has not all been negative this past year. We've learned and we've evolved, in a much quicker pace in terms of what using an LMS and online learning can do in positive ways. And it's not for everyone. And it's good to hear. My final question was, you talked about, my biggest concern is right now we know for the vast majority of students that are doing virtual, it's not working for them. But there's about a quarter of students roughly where it is working. And there's also those special students where traditional schools that have really not met their needs, where they're thriving in a virtual environment. And so I'm glad that we're looking at these options, but I want to couch my enthusiasm based on, are we going to have the numbers to make it work? And given the fact that we're talking about a small subset of our population, really the vast majority right now, given the existing COVID slide, probably need to be in the classroom where that extra intervention can occur and be most effective. But again, there is that population where I think this is highly exciting, and I think we can take the best lessons of what we've learned and what's really worked and be innovative. And I would encourage us, hopefully, from a legislative standpoint, that if we can use a virtual school to increase enrollment, increase dollars, and provide and fulfill a need out there for students who aren't getting maybe some of those advanced classes from where they're located, providing one of the on a course-by-course basis or in a virtual school setting, I'm all for that. So let's just hope the legislature agrees.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Mr. Hogg.
Thank you, President Mays. And Dr. Wertz, I appreciate you bringing exploratory things, and it's a brave thing to bring exploratory things, but we do need this knowledge, and this is good information. For my colleagues, one of the major bills that we need to track is Committee Substitute Senate Bill 27 by Senator Taylor. It's a major item, and one of the things he struck in some of the language was that districts can't deny if they're offering a substantially similar course, which is a problem from that scenario, one of those. The virtual learning is good, and so Dr. Wertz, as the question comes, and Ms. Fowler asked it, students changing back and forth, I was glad to hear you say no, because that's a terrible idea, unless we have to have the option where almost virtual can be a privilege, not a right, from where it comes in. So if you are performing, if you are doing the right things, if you are producing, then you can remain virtual. Otherwise, we will bring you back to the classroom where it's proven learning is at a higher level. Some students do excel, and it takes a lot of self-discipline sometimes to excel virtually from that side. And so I think it's the question of, also Dr. Wertz, as we get into it, I'm just making a couple of statements more than questions. I do think we have to have the option to be able to decline students on those choices. And I also think we have to be very particular about which classes work well in a virtual environment and which ones do not. And the example I start thinking of is some science classes where they need some hands-on, you need some labs and some of those things, or, there's some belief that some foreign language can be done in person, but some people believe it works better in person to be able to do that. So I think we just have to be very particular about which classes we offer. You mentioned it, and I fully agree with opening it up to outside the district if someone needs to take those. It can not only help us bring students in, but there's also maybe some classes that our students aren't taking that are offered by another district, and through some partnerships with districts we can offer to expand class option. Let me ask, when teachers are teaching virtual, are we going to keep class ratios at approximately the same levels?
That's a question I can't answer yet until we have an idea about what's the ideal number of students that should be in an online class. Typically in online classes, there are larger amounts of students sitting in a roster than in a face-to-face environment because you don't have the constraints of the space. So I don't know the answer to that question yet, but it is one of those design elements that we'll be considering.
And I appreciate that. And I think that's just something to think about. And across campuses, I think it's a great thing to do that. And if it's modifying classrooms with cubicle, we need to plan those things out. And I know you are exploratory, so I want to thank you for bringing it up. But there is a lot that goes into this, and we have to keep monitoring our legislature because they will make a major decision. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Ms. Walton.
Thank you, President Mays. Goodness gracious. We are reinventing major parts of how we do this, and that's exciting. And I appreciate your enthusiasm for this because it's quite a feat to try to do and dance with TEA at the same time. I just have a couple of quick questions on that idea of kiddos that maybe at one campus that are virtually doing something at another campus in a room where they might be. I hope that we're planning some sort of supervision of that area, depending on the age and so forth. I figured I see you were nodding your head, so that's a good sign. And the question about can students enroll from another district to ours to do virtual? Did you say that TEA was doing interviews and would select 50 districts?
So that was two concepts. So what TEA is interviewing and selecting districts on are around they call it the Virtual and Hybrid Schools Accelerator Program. And basically, they're selecting 50 school districts or 50 consortiums, which usually consist of smaller school districts that come together for some of the reasons that were talked about. And they have partners that work with TEA that they're assigning to school districts to help them in their design. To accelerate that process and to help them over the course of the year. That's what that's about. The question about kids enrolling from other districts, we don't know the answer to that question. It's a highly debated topic right now in the legislative session because there is some concern about smaller districts losing students to larger districts where there are more options because of the access they'll have just by going virtual. So I don't know if that's going to be allowed or not. We're kind of waiting to see, but we will respond in whatever way is going to benefit our system and our students once we know what we're allowed.
Well, sure, yeah. I would think that it would be harder for smaller districts to provide wide a range of,
Right.
Of courses. And so that this might be an opportunity for some of the smaller ones to, share their children with a district that is one of these that are a consortium of school districts that could take them. So seems to me there's got to be some
there may be opportunities. There may be opportunities. We don't really know what they are. That challenge, that small districts that you described, they have that now even before virtual ever existed. The courses that they can offer are just more limited because of the volume of students and staff.
Sure.
But if there are opportunities to partner, what that would look like in terms of finances and all that, we will work within the limits to maximize the system once we know what it is, but we just don't know yet.
Yeah, we just need, we share students, we share ADA, yeah. Thank you very much for your help on that.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Dr. Reich?
Thank you, President Mays, and thank you for the information, Dr. Wirtz. I applaud anything that we can do regarding flex scheduling. It's something that has been near and dear to me and Mr. Hogg for many, many years. So, that is certainly an opportunity that has surfaced. We'll see what the legislature does. I was just curious, with the interest indicator, the survey that you'll be doing, I know you said it's going to be very simple. Are you going to do any kind of framing of what that looks like, or something to say as a disclaimer that it may or may not be what you're experiencing right now, because that could certainly affect the results?
Yes, in fact, we've talked about that at length, and we have drafted a disclaimer that will accompany the survey, and we will also send out information to families before the survey is launched so they understand, here's the context, you're going to get a survey in the next couple of days, and this is what it will be asking you. And then with the survey, we'll also reinforce that context so they have a sense that it is different. The other thing that I failed to mention that we'll also include in the survey is an open-ended question that will allow us to understand why they're motivated to do this, take a school in a virtual environment, so that we can customize programming to meet their needs as we design.
Okay, that's good. And then as far as communication out to the rest of the district, to the teachers, is there a component of that, hey, we're looking at this and it's not going to be what you've experienced this year, et cetera, because the word's going to get out, and I'd hate for teachers to go, what are we doing here?
Right, yeah, no, we'll work with Anita, Ms. Foster, and her team to make sure that it's included as part of that discussion. I know many of us in meetings that we've been in have already started talking about that possibility. And also we have teachers on the task force helping us to design the actual schools. That's part of the process.
Great. And then the final question on the 50 districts, that cohort is, that's something that would provide us extra resources if we're not selected as one of those 50s. That doesn't prohibit us from going further, correct?
No, not at all. In fact, we are operating, we already started this process before that accelerator program was even initiated from TEA. The reason we chose to apply is because, frankly, why turn down help if it can accelerate the process and have an outside person think with an objective point of view to help us refine our process, and that's why we decided to engage with that. But if, for example, we were not selected, we would intend to continue with our design regardless. We would just work with other partners that we are currently working with. We wouldn't rely on a line from TEA.
Okay, and then the final, I guess it's more of a statement. Of course, this is all subject to legislative purview, but everything does come down to the almighty dollar. And so we'll see where that cooperative effort comes from when 80% of our school districts are rural. There might be a lot of lobbying in the legislature. No, we can't do that. But if we can work something where it is financially a viable model for those partner districts and us as the lead district, I would also add to that, maybe for our legislative consultants to include in that discussion, is that would include perhaps charters as well. We are a district of choice. Charters, a lot of people flock to those just because it's something different. Charters are, I know, in a situation where they'd like to have additional opportunities, and they would essentially they are a small district. So that might be an opportunity as well. So just putting that out there.
It's an excellent point, Dr. Rice. Just a little context, and to your point, that's where the battle is, if you will.
Right.
Who's going to be allowed to do this, under what situation, and under what funding? So just as a reminder, and I share this with individuals who we speak with about this whole concept. Pre-pandemic, virtual wasn't really allowed.
Right.
The virtual school network is very small and very restrictive, and it's almost a disincentive to start one. So virtual wasn't allowed. So when we talk about innovation and changes and adaptations, we want the state to come with us on that. That's the real challenge, because quite frankly, pre-pandemic, if you weren't in school and counted for attendance, you weren't funded.
Right.
And very old, archaic kind of system now that we look back, right? So those adaptations have to come from the state, and that's the challenge, because they have to adapt funding, how you count attendance, what you require. Do you require them to come to school at some point? What grade levels are eligible? So all those are really open questions. It's an interesting challenge. I think as a district, we provide many opportunities for students. And from our perspective, this is one more opportunity that we should, under certain conditions, right, be exploring and providing for our students. And so it's in that spirit that kind of this discussion and this motivation, et cetera, is because we have so many opportunities from career tech, fine arts, athletics, you name it. This would be one more tool for students to be successful under the right conditions, et cetera. But to your point, that's where the battle is. Who's going to be allowed to do it, under what conditions, how can you enroll, and all that.
Yeah, and that's why I'm hopeful that we can help frame that debate up front, because somebody's going to use that as the mighty sword to kill the whole thing. And I'd like to stay on the front end of it, frame that debate as much as possible, lead it so that it doesn't happen, so that we can offer this for our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. Mrs. Fowler.
Thank you, President Mays. Dr. Wirtz, you'll probably have to get back with me on this question, but I'm curious to know how grades hopefully have improved. The high schoolers have been back 5 days a week for probably, about 2 weeks now? And I'm curious to know what the grades are looking like, from virtual grades to in-person grades.
So that's a good question. So you're specifically referring to the grades over the last couple of weeks since we've started coming back. So we won't really know how grades will look until we get to the progress report kind of place, and we kind of dip into grade books and know. And usually the reason I say that is because teachers don't, the deadline for them to actually have grades in to produce a progress report is around the 3-week mark. So once we get to about 3 weeks, then we have a chance to kind of dip in and see how it's kind of going. But I always say that with caution, because students, especially high school students, are very aware of what a progress report means and what a 6-week report card means. And so sometimes students know very frankly that they're behind in the 3-week point and communicate that to their mom and dad, but have every intention on getting up to par by the 6th week. So I'm happy to share that with Dr. Cavazos and with you all about where we are in terms of the dipstick. That's the only caveat I would add to that, is it's really kind of hard to know because they're pretty smart.
Yeah, they are. But I'm just curious
That's
to see.
speaking from my own household, to be honest.
Exactly. But I'm just curious to see, my thoughts are that we're going to see grades going up, but it will just be interesting to see what those grades look like from virtual.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about too is, especially as kids transition from one environment to the other, there is an adjustment period that takes place. Some of the kids that are coming back that Dr. Brown spoke to have been gone the entire year, and now they're showing up in class again. And so I don't think we can underestimate what that is like for them, just emotionally reacclimating to being back in school, and the accountability that's in place really strongly at the campus that may have been a little bit more difficult to do at home. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, and I can share with you what we know as we know it. But our best place is really at the 3-week and the 6-week point. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
I have one more question that's probably for Dr. Brown. And I had it here, and then I didn't want to interrupt when Dr. Wirtz started. On that page that showed how many students have returned because they reached out to them, mainly they were elementaries, and then you had some information about Sam Houston High School, but it just said how many they had reached out to, and it did not say how many had actually returned to campus. Do you have that number?
No, I don't have that specific information because that's rolling data that they look at, but I can, if you're interested, I can certainly ask them how many have returned
Yeah, I'm
based
just
on the
curious.
359 contacts.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr.
Yes,
Brown.
ma'am.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Okay, next item on our agenda, discussion action item, considering any motions necessary.
Thank you, President Mays, and we don't have any motions necessary under this item to consider tonight.
Okay, then we will continue. We've got our items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda. Are there any items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda? Okay, I see none. So tonight we'll be considering the items that are listed on your agenda under consent items. Mrs. Moss, we are ready to hear from you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, President Mays, Trustees, Dr. Cavazos. We have 3 bids for your consideration tonight. Those are all actual annual contracts, and administration recommends approval of the consent items.
Okay, so is there a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Move for approval.
Do I have a second? Okay, it's got a motion from Mr. Hogg, a second by Ms. Walton. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Okay, all in attendance voted yes, the motion passes. Mark it where? Okay, 6 voted yes, 1 is not voting because he's not in his seat, Dr. Roche. Okay, we will continue on our agenda. Next, we have discussion items. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays, and we move into our discussion items with the progress report for the Board of Trustees Continuing Education Credit. And so tonight, the board has been provided your continuing education credits that board members have acquired. And at this time, Ms. Benjamin, everybody has received their credit, is that correct?
Yes, sir. All trustees have exceeded requirements.
Thank you. And so we bring this as a discussion, just an information item as well, as it's required to be reported.
Okay, so Dr. Cavazos, I have the report of the individual hours for all trustees. They have all exceeded their required training hours. They have been provided the literature that covers the framework for school board development that was adopted by the Texas State Board of Education. And for that, I will move it back to you if you have anything else to add.
Nothing else to add on this item.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next discussion item, the 2021-22 preliminary budget update.
Thank you, President Mays. And so tonight, we bring another budget update. We've already provided one, I believe, in January. And as the legislative session continues and as we get more clarity about our own budget situation and where we are in planning for next year's budget, we want to take this opportunity to bring this update. We covered this with the Finance Committee as well. And I think it's important, we're kind of shifting gears on our discussion here because we've been talking about virtual learning and things like that. The budget process is something that continues to evolve, and we want to make sure that we have that opportunity to discuss because as we move forward it kind of moves rather quickly as we get into June to talk about the finances and the budget proposals for the following school year. So with that, Darla Moss will present our preliminary budget planning.
Thank you. And again, Dr. Faso said in January, we did bring you a budget update. In January, that focus was on the current year's budget. Tonight, we want to just share with you some of the things that we're looking at for the 2021-2022 budget. Not any numbers or any revenue numbers that we're bringing tonight, but just showing you what we're doing in the process as we go along to build that budget tonight. Okay, so just a brief look at the timeline and what's expected of us and what's required of our district. The items that the board has to take action on. So that first item I'll point out is on April the 30th, we'll receive our estimated values or buy that from the Tarrant Appraisal District. And that will give us the information that we need to estimate our values and start to share out those revenue numbers as we make those projections. That information will also help to generate a proposed tax rate. That is the first action from the board and occurs in June. The public hearing, the adoption of the compensation plan, and the adoption of the budget also occur in June. And the next item after that would occur in August, and that's when the board will actually adopt the tax rate. And so just an overview of the budget process. The foundation, of course, of the budget is a demographic study. And Dr. Cavazos mentioned that we shared with the Finance Committee this information a couple of weeks ago. We actually brought our demographer in at that time, and he went over a presentation showing how he came up with our enrollment numbers. So the district partners with Templeton Demographics for this process, and the study was completed in the fall. Rocky Gardner is actually works with our district personnel. He works with our human resources department. He works with research and accountability, and they all collaborate, and of course, finance and budget, and they all collaborate to come up with the number that's best for the district. Human resources also completes a staffing analysis, and that's based on our projected enrollment that we come up with. A little later, we'll share historically how that looks for the district. Our budget and finance works with the departments using a zero-based budget process, and our departments are asked to assess their needs and to enter that information into a line item detail in our system. Our campus allocations are also projected based on that enrollment number that district personnel come up with. And so this is just a picture of what it takes for us to start putting that puzzle together for the budget. We look at several items that are significant in that process. I mentioned earlier that we'll receive those property values by the end of the month, and we're evaluating and monitoring our attendance and its impact on whole harmless. I'll talk a little more about whole harmless here in a minute, but our kindergarten pre-K enrollment is being monitored closely, and we're analyzing all of our PPE cost for the 2020 school year. We're looking at our PPE costs for the current year in order to determine what next year is going to look like for us and what we need to budget as far as PPE for next year. We're monitoring also our federal funding. There's been a lot out there about the availability of what's coming for the district. I'll share that with you as well. And but for now, let's go back to whole harmless. There are some conditions, and we talked about whole harmless earlier. But I just wanted to point out some of those conditions to the board. TEA has held the district harmless for the first 2 6 weeks attendance, and there were no conditions for those first 2 6 weeks. For the third 6 weeks reporting period, we're held harmless on the condition that we allowed on-campus instruction throughout that entire third 6 weeks period. The second condition for the third 6 weeks period was that we had to send in to TEA an attestation that we allowed for on-campus learning. And we have sent that in. I believe it was back in January, we sent that into TEA, and we were good for the third 6 weeks. For the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth 6 weeks periods, the district also must meet 2 conditions. Sorry, give me just a sec. Okay. The average on-campus attendance participation rate during the 6 weeks reporting period must be equal to or greater than 80% of all students being educated during the 6 week period. We can meet that condition, or the average on-campus attendance participation rate during the 6 week attendance reporting period is equal to or greater than the on-campus attendance that we reported in the fall snapshot. Eric Upchurch and the technology department, Dr. Barlow, in research and accountability are working on those numbers right now. And there's no reason for us not to believe that we will not meet those numbers and be held harmless for the last 6 weeks. We're in, not to say that we will, but it's trending like we will. This is just a snapshot of the district's historical student enrollment. And of course, you all know that that number has been trending down for Arlington. And based on the demographer's report, it will continue to do so for the next several years. Okay, it's not going forward. Thank you. So this slide is one that I asked the staff to pull together for me, and I think it paints a really good picture of what the district has done historically as far as our staffing. So if you look at the blue line, that shows you the count of our students. If you look at that orange line, kind of a burnt orange, that shows you the count of our staff. And so these should trend together, and you can see that they do. That line on the top is also representative of our total staff, and it's trending that way as well. I will tell you that we look very closely, and Mark Strand and team do an outstanding job as far as analyzing that and what we need to do as far as staffing on an annual basis. We're working with them now on starting to look at all staff to see where we are in regards to that number as well. The other thing on this slide I will point out is that the yellow bars represent the revenue for the district, and you'll see that that continues to increase, even though you see the little decline in the student and teacher, which it should be there. But that yellow, of course, represents our revenue, and it's trending up. That allows for the district to stay competitive as far as compensation and other things. So this is something that we'll continue to monitor and make sure that we're in a good position. Now I want to just show you a snapshot of enrollment changes based on what we projected. The district is projecting 56,447 for the 2021-2022 school year. That's a difference from the first semester of about 300. At the end of the semester, we had 56,747. So we're projecting that we'll have 56,447 for next school year. I also want to share out about our tax compression for 21-22. Initially, the state's comptroller's office had projected statewide growth of 0.29%, and that has now been revised to 1.84%. However, that number is still lower than the number that's needed for compression. So based on that information, we will not see tax rate compression for 21-22. However, if AISD's taxable values increase more than 2.5%, we will have to compress that tax rate. Right now, in our conversations with the Tarrant Appraisal District, we're looking at just keeping that flat at a 0%, and they're telling us that it could possibly actually go, we could possibly see a decrease. And I'll show you how that impacts revenue here in a minute. Of course, we're taking that information and we're still going to present scenarios based on maybe we see an increase or not. So we'll look at all areas. And this is just a picture of where our tax rate was for 2019-20. We were at 97 cents for the total M&O tax rate because that was the first year of the compression after House Bill 3. For 2021, the VATRE passed thanks to all of the citizens of Arlington, and we were able to have a tax rate of 1.0864. Without compression, we would have that same tax rate for the 21-22 tax year. And so I mentioned we're still evaluating and looking at what those percentages would do. These numbers, of course, I always have a disclaimer on there. They're subject to change based on legislation, but we're looking at a 0% increase with net revenue of $493 million. That's under current law. That could possibly change. And if we were to see a 2% increase in values, that would create an additional $7 million for the district. A 3% would increase by $11 million. The next slide, I want to share how COVID-19 has impacted the district. And the reason we look at that is we want to see, again, as I said earlier, what have we spent on COVID-19, PPE, all those costs during the first year? What are we spending this year? And what might we have to spend for the 21-22 budget? And that is still to be determined based on the work that our team is doing now. But you can see that in 19-20, we spent $10.9 million. And in the current year so far, we've spent $19.9 million. So we're taking those numbers and trying to determine what we need to put in next year's budget in regards to our COVID-19 or PPE cost. One thing I will point out on this slide, because it stood out to me when I first got the data, is under cleaning and sanitation, you'll see that we spent $1 million in 19-20. And of course, that was just the first only 3 months of the fiscal year that we were experiencing the pandemic. In 2021, this year so far, we've only spent $218. That's because we were buying inventory to prepare for the 2021 fiscal year. And of course, we're heavy into springtime here, and we forget that just a few weeks ago we had a winter storm that Mr. Horn and his team is still working on, and we're still working with insurance adjusters on that as well. The reason we're bringing that to you is that it may impact our 21-22 fiscal year budget, depending on when everything is wrapped up with that. If we receive our insurance funds this year, it will not impact next year, but it may not happen, and we have to evaluate that to see how much we're going to have to put into the budget for next year for that. We do have a $250,000 deductible. Our property insurance total projected so far is $6.8 million. We met with them, and that number does continue to rise. We met with them, and they believe that they will be able to cover all of that, those expenditures. One other point I wanted to make on that $250,000 deductible that the district has, Anita Foster is working with the foundation Matthew McConaughey and his foundation has awarded the district $250,000, so that will cover that cost for us. Okay, so earlier we talked about the impact of COVID, and here's a chart that shows some of what is helping the district out with some of those expenditures. It shows everything that we've received so far from federal and state assistance. If you'll look in that first column, we've received $16.9 million. I'll point out that under ESSER 1, that $15 million is what was supplanted by the state. So we actually didn't receive those dollars, but it was, we were made whole on those. We have $5.4 million in process right now. We look to be reimbursed at least 84% of that number that we have applied for so far. And you'll notice the asterisk, of course, in that future estimate. These are the ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3 funds that have been communicated out there. The numbers that you see are based on the number of our students and our Title I dollars. Now I'm going to just share out our general fund balance that's been in the legislative session a lot this year and has been for several years. I just wanted to give you a picture of where we stand, and it does continue to grow. But as our revenue grows and our expenditures grow, you can expect that to grow a little bit. One thing I would like to point out to the board is just the definition of fund balance. Some people think that it's a savings account or it's all cash. That's not the case. Some of that amount is inventory for us. It's strictly the difference between our assets and our liabilities at the end of the fiscal year. That's it in a nutshell. And I do want to share on the next screen some of the reasons why we do need that. Our local cash revenue cash flow, the timing of our property tax payments. We're a July 1 fiscal year district. That means our fiscal year starts July 1 and ends on June 30th. So July 1, our budget is open for spending for that fiscal year. Most of our local revenue dollars, we do not start to receive until December and January. Our state funding payments do not come in July. They don't start until October. And we don't get our last payment for the fiscal year until August of the next year. So we're depending on that fund balance for operations. And of course, we talked about the winter storm. We've had a tornado in November, the pandemic. We have to spend our money for all those things until we're reimbursed from the state and federal government. And so I'll end here with what administration has come up with as our budget priorities. Number one on the list is our competitive compensation for our teachers and our staff. Our Human Resources Department is working with TASB for a stipend review and adjustments for those stipends to ensure that we're competitive with other districts. Dr. Wirtz and his team are working on what we need as far as student recovery, intervention, and academic support, social and emotional learning support, and our technology department is working on what we need for our students as far as technology items. And so I'll wrap up, I guess, by saying, one, thank you to our staff. Our budget process does not start now. It actually started back in the fall. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not just finance that works on budget. It takes the academics department, transportation. We're working with facilities. We work with all departments, all campuses to pull this work together. We're in transition in the finance department, and we're doing some things a little differently. It may seem like we're bringing this information to you a little slower than you're accustomed to getting it. But we're working on that to have you a proposed budget by June 22nd. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moss. Do I have any questions or comments from trustees? Going once? Okay. Mr. Chapa?
Thank you, President Mays. Ms. Moss, I just have a couple questions on the, first there was the chart that had the COVID-19 impact, our estimated costs to date. And I know this is more of a refresher for me. I know that we designated some fund balance earlier this school year. And so if you go to the general operating fund balance bar chart, it shows that our assigned fund balance basically increased this year. How much of the designating of fund balance that we did covers these costs?
Well, we'll wait until we're reimbursed from all the other organizations to see what cost there is. If we get to the end of the year and we start to do our audit, that's when we'll determine whether or not we need to undesignate those funds and put it back into fund balance based on what we've been reimbursed for our expenses so far.
Okay. And so that we'll make the decision on whether or not to undesignate those funds this budget cycle or next.
It will be, actually, that's during our audit process. So before we close the books for this fiscal year, 2021, we'll make that decision then.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's the only question I have.
Oh, Justin, you caught me off guard. I figured you'd have some more questions. I took some water. Okay, Mr. Wilbanks.
Thank you, President Mays, and thank you, Ms. Moss, for your presentation. Since you're on this slide, I had a question on this one as well. A little bit curious of what makes up the payroll, the $6 million on payroll. Is that for stipends or covering employees with some of the resolutions that we had passed previously? It just seemed that number just jumped out as a little.
Yes, for 1920, the biggest portion of that is when we continued to pay salaries and employees were not actually in the district working. So that's the biggest portion of that. When you look at the 6.5 million, that's for like substitutes. If we had employees who were out due to COVID-related illnesses or anything like that, those subs that we brought in go into that category.
Okay. All right, that seems reasonable. It was a much bigger number than I expected, I think.
Yes, and I when I got the data given to me, I asked for this data and I got it. I went back and researched that because it seemed a little high to me too. But if you think about all the benefits and everything that comes along with the salaries, it's
yeah. The way you explained it, it makes sense now.
So, Mr. Wilbanks, if I may, just real quick, just for context, these are budgeted salaries, right? So what we've captured here, I think, because Darla and I had this discussion, we're capturing the cost for COVID. So it's not above necessarily what we had already in our budget for salaries, necessarily. In some cases it is, but that also represents, like when we had the shutdown, right? The state and others have asked us to capture COVID cost, and that is a COVID cost, if you will.
Yeah, so these are
just for clarity, it's not like unbudgeted funds.
Right.
All of it, some of it is.
So, some of it is above and beyond what we had
Some of it
budgeted,
is.
like the technology, I imagine.
That's correct. You got
But however, my next question is on the technology, those were going to be reimbursed with the ESSER 1 funds?
That's correct. And on 2 slides over, I
Or
think.
80% of them?
Right. Darla, Ms. Moss showed how much of that has been reimbursed so far. So this is all kind of pieces to the puzzle. I think the important part here is we've captured, and thank you to staff and everybody involved in this, because it's a very meticulous process to keep track of all the COVID costs, anything related to COVID. And that's what you're seeing represented here.
Yeah, no, thank you for that clarification, Dr. Cavazos. And, I want people at home to understand that, we didn't get hit with $20 million over what we had already budgeted. Some of it is, but fortunately, most that was above what was budgeted is being reimbursed, correct?
The majority of it.
Majority.
Yeah, so another way of saying that, because it's an important point, Mr. Wilbanks, so I apologize for interrupting here again, but What another important point to capture here is hold harmless was also a piece of this puzzle. That's why all those puzzle
Yes.
pieces were demonstrated. If we didn't have hold harmless and we had these expenditures, that'd be an issue because we wouldn't be getting the revenue for it. So all these things fit together, but this is capturing, because we had a lot of discussion about this as well, this is capturing every cost of COVID. But then it makes up with, some of the hold harmless to cover some of this. But that's why the conditions for the last hold harmless is important, that they are met so that we continue to generate that revenue to address these costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just the one other thing I'll point out on this slide, this is not just general operating expenditures. You will see that
Food
we have our
service.
student nutrition on there, and some of the bond dollars that we use for technology are included as well.
And I know you have TBD listed for next year, but is it reasonable to expect that things like the additional food service costs, given the fact that most students will be close to normal in terms of food operation, and that
And so that's what we're evaluating right now, is how we're going to be operating if the majority of the students come back. What are the needs? Are we going to need more PPE? We're looking at what we currently have on hand in the warehouses and determining, do we need to purchase more for this fiscal year or do we not? So those are all the things that and again, we are looking at our food service operation and how it will, be operating next year. We have gotten word already that we will again be able to give students free meals again for next year, for the next school year. So we're taking all of that into consideration. When we do that, we have to prepare it a little differently. So our food services team is taking that into consideration as we build their budget. Their budget is one that has to be approved by the board as well. So we're currently reviewing all of that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ms. Moss. Now, I do have a question about the tax rate. Did you have a slide showing that right there? Yeah. So right now, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. We did cover this in finance, and at that time you were more leaning towards, Tad was saying that we should expect a 0 increase in the property values. Now they're saying more like 2%?
No, they're still saying that it will be flat. This is just for our benefit. And when we build a budget, I like to bring to you different scenarios. So if you'll remember last year when we adopted the budget, they also told us that it would likely be flat. And we came in at about 2% or a little over 2% last year. So I'm just running the numbers to see how that might impact us if their number is off a little bit. Again, we get that information by April 30th. We'll see what their number is, and we'll start to run some numbers and do some calculations to make some projections.
I know that projection might seem a shock to those listening at home who've already gotten their TAD notification and what their new valuation is. Everyone I know has seen at least a 10% increase. But the other side of the equation is COVID has been very hard on our commercial businesses.
Exactly.
And I think a much larger portion of our tax revenue comes from the commercial side. So even though you may be hearing this and thinking, oh, what, they must be crazy because why did my property tax go up by 10%? Is that the primary reason?
Exactly right, yes.
Yeah, and I would be interested if TAD breaks that estimate out. If that could be emailed to the board to see the breakout between what the increase in property values on the commercial side as well as the residential.
Yeah, we can do that. The other thing that I will mention that we're doing is we're going back and looking at historical data. Typically in April, it's a little low and then they tend to drop when we get to July. I'm accustomed to just the opposite. I'm accustomed to April being there and then it increases to July because, you're being a little conservative in April and you have the increase. So our staff and team is looking at that data historically so we can kind of find the trend for this appraisal district.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I do want to commend you on one thing. one final thing, if you could go to your beautiful slide with the burnt orange line.
Thank you, and I will not take credit for that. I actually asked for it, but my Sheena Jocelyn, our budget director, pulled that together for me, and it's beautiful, isn't it? But it tells the story, and that's exactly what I was.
It tells a great story, and I think that it was very helpful when you shared that with us in finance. And it gives us some comfort just looking at that, seeing our revenues increase, despite the fact that our enrollment is probably declining more than we're comfortable with. So, and it does mean, like you said, that we are in a good position to be competitive going forward on our salaries. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Any other questions or comments from trustees? Okay, I see no lights. Ms. Moss, thank you very much for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And before I go to the next one, I omitted saying thank you to Dr. Wirtz and to Dr. Brown for their previous presentation. Okay, next discussion item, racial and social equity update. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And so, as we have done this evening several times, we are switching gears again. But I will just share with everyone that these items are interdependent. And that's really, I think, an important thing to keep in mind. So as we talk about budget priorities, recovery after COVID, revenue that we receive from the state, hold harmless, virtual learning opportunities, welcoming more students back to class. These things are connected. And so this next item is connected to that as well. Because in order for us to have continued success and enhanced success, we must also examine our racial and social equity in the district. And so the board adopted a resolution in the summer of 2020 that gave some clear visioning and direction related to racial and social equity for our school district. And so Dr. Brown has this presentation, but I want to frame it with the two parts of that resolution that were critical. And they're about half and half. First part is a comprehensive examination of our culture, curriculum, instruction, and internal systems. So first half is a comprehensive examination. The second half is actually to do something about it. So as we examine these items in our district, then that we would actually take action to address them and improve them. And so as we look at tonight's work, it's the first part, which is that deep examination in our school district related to culture, curriculum, instruction, and internal systems related to racial and social equity. And so I want to thank Dr. Brown for leading this effort. But Dr. Brown has reminded us often that it takes all of us in this work. And so we have a task force, we have a group of people in the district that have been helping us with this work. And so Dr. Brown will lead us through a presentation of where we are thus far in this important work of racial and social equity in our school district. Dr. Brown.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cavazos, and glad to be back with you this evening to provide an update on our racial and social equity work in Arlington ISD. I often say the time is now and we are the people, and I think that's important for us to continue to remember. This is a great opportunity for us collectively to be able to engage in meaningful conversations and work in our system. This language is actually part of the resolution that the board passed in the summer, and it still rings true today that we still want to make sure that we're continuing to provide an environment in our school district, in our system, that is equitable and that's free of racism and inequities, and the comprehensive examination will allow us to determine where some of those marks might be. So I think it's important that we just spend some time talking about what's really been happening behind the scenes, because you may have thought, gosh, it's been months since we've talked about this, since our last update, and I guarantee you there's been lots of work happening just to make sure that we are launching this in the appropriate space and way, and that we have the information that we need, the right partner, and the right steps to be able to engage in this meaningful work. So I want to just kind of share with you a little bit about the work we've engaged in over the last several months, and that is engaging in numerous collaborative sessions with our partner, which is Hanover, as well as our steering committee and our task force, to really make sure that we're laying the foundation and groundwork for the work that we're going to engage in the coming months and subsequent years. It was important that we shared the context of Arlington, the context of our culture and our community, so that the Hanover team that's working with us is right there lockstep with us in knowing what we are going to be focusing on and some history about our system. We also spent time outlining the work for the next 6 months. So we know, and Dr. Cavazos has said this before, this is not something that's going to happen overnight, or we're going to have strategies or all these ideas and it's going to be a 2 or 3 month process. It's going to take time. So we're going to talk to you about the first 6 months of this work and that examination and what that's going to entail. It was also important that we spent time talking with the people who initially expressed interest in our district and being part of this work. So keeping them engaged, continuing to communicate with them about steps and where we were in the process, and that has happened throughout the last few months. One thing we talked about as a steering committee, and Dr. Cavazos wanted to make sure as a cabinet that we engage in this conversation, is we really just talked about what are our greatest hopes for this work. Like if we could just wave a magic crystal ball or magic wand and say, this is our ultimate hope, and really to be able to listen to each other about what we really want to see happen as a result of this work. And then also conversely, what is our greatest fear? Because sometimes when you outline what that greatest fear might be, you can be more proactive in making sure that does not come to fruition. So we spent some time really talking about that as a system. Again, just really laying the foundation, making sure we're on the same page and a clear understanding of the direction and steps that we were going to take. So this is what the next 6 months looks like. And I'll talk to you about each of these steps in just a moment. But at a glance, we'll first have an equity and inclusion survey. We'll have an equity audit that's actually happening simultaneously, actually right now. We'll talk about benchmarking equity frameworks, how we look at other peer aspirant districts to see what are some best practices they have in their systems that we might be able to emulate, modify, or tweak. And then also really be able to engage in this listening tour. Part of the examination is talking to our people, all different types of people in our system, to really get an idea of what their perceptions and experiences have been in Arlington ISD, and then ultimately be able to dig into the data and have meaningful conversations about the trends that have been identified through this diagnostic survey. So what I'll do now is just kind of walk you through each part of this process. And again, this is just the next 6 months, so it's a pretty tight examination for the next 6 months. And the first part of this is the Equity and Inclusion Diagnostic Survey. One thing I just want to outline is this part of our conversation is about racial and social equity, but it's important that we also remember this is going to inform a broader conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's going to not only talk about the experience of our Black students and staff members and community members, which was what our resolution entails, but it's also going to inform broader work. So this Equity and Inclusion Diagnostic Survey, it's important that we are looking at not only the race and ethnicity component, but also how inclusive is our system in general. So we're going to be soliciting feedback, perceptions from students, grades 6 through 12, and varying degrees of questions depending on our age appropriateness, parents and guardians in our system, and also staff members. And being able to engage in this survey to just really be able to help us understand constructs in our system of race, culture, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, ability, socioeconomic background. And what the expected outcome we have of this work is that the Hanover is going to be able to establish like baseline perceptions of what all of these particular groups in our system have talked about in terms of their lived experiences. This baseline survey that we're going to have this year is going to be just that. And every subsequent year, we'll engage in a survey so we can be able to track strategies and systems that we put in place to see if we're generating some positive results and outcomes. I also wanted to share the research questions that Hanover is going to be engaging in. And again, we've been lockstep side by side with them through this entire process, helping them and make sure the research questions are aligned with what we seek for our organization. So number one is, what are perceptions in AISD of diversity, equity, and inclusion? What are differences in perceptions? How can we filter and look at specific student groups, parent groups, demographics, locations, geographically in our system to be able to break down the data in a meaningful way? And then what are priorities for our stakeholders? Again, this is across the board. What are priorities that they have as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion? We want to make sure this is accessible language-wise to all of our parents and our students. And so just wanted to share that we do have the survey available in the languages that are listed below. So the next slide just basically gives you an idea of the possible time frame for this survey. We are still right now finalizing some of the questions in the survey and finalizing that process. So we have not yet determined our launch date. We're thinking it's going to be about mid-May that we do this, but it's important that we set the foundation and lay the groundwork in terms of messaging with our parents, with our staff members, and our students, so everyone has a clear understanding of why we're engaging in the conversation and what we seek to gain from their perceptions and their experiences. So after the survey goes out, we give them about a 2-week time frame to be able to complete the survey. And then we will get those results probably the end of June or sometime in July as a senior team. We'll be able to look at that data. They'll help us identify what are some trends and themes that we saw as we filter through this survey data. Once we have that survey data, it's going to be really important because that's when we're going to be able to now go to focus groups. So we have this survey we sent out. Here are some trends that we identified in the survey. Let's go talk about the lived experiences now. So qualitatively, we'll have focus groups engaging in conversation around these themes. We'll have listening leaders who've also volunteered to be part of this work to be able to go and interview people on their campus or in their departments. Again, just a way to be able to get qualitative data around the big ideas and big rocks that have been generated through the diagnostic survey. Also wanted to share just some sample questions, just in the constructs of how these questions have been established. And so again, there'll be some questions that are for parents, some questions are going to be for staff members, some are going to be for high school students, and some will be for our 6th through 8th grade students. But in general, we want to know, overall, my child support, my school supports, or my child supports different races, ethnicities, skin colors, cultures, genders. I've identified there where you'll see where there are some questions that, of course, are not going to be for our 6th through 8th grade students. Hanover's done a lot of work with many districts around this equity work. And they've also made sure that the language they use, the number of choices that they offer are age appropriate for those who are engaging in the survey. Another one is really just about how do students experience teaching and learning in the classroom? So does their teacher use books and stories from many different perspectives? Is there a conversation about discrimination and racism, or are we engaging in meaningful conversations about diversity at the high school level, for example, with our parents, with our students? Another set of sample questions about positive student relationships. Adults at my school or my child's school respect students of all backgrounds. We'll be able to, again, filter all this data all the way down student level, staff level, and parents level. That's the first leg of our work, is the diagnostic survey. And the second part is the equity audit. And this is actually happening as we speak. In fact, the data transfer happened today, so it's really an exciting time. And so for this equity audit, the purpose of this is for us to really be able to do this deep, thorough examination for the last 5 to 7 years of data in our system. So as a result, we'll be able to produce, the team will produce an equity scorecard and an equity dashboard. So this equity scorecard is basically going to look at tons of data that we have already available in our system. It's going to be displayed in a heat map. So we'll look at academic outcomes, behavioral outcomes, disciplinary infractions over the last 5 to 7 years. We'll be able to look by student group, by grade band, by school year, by campus, to be able to see whether there may be some inequities or disparities and specifically on the scorecard. The dashboard allows us to have side-by-side comparisons. So again, the equity dashboard and scorecard is all of our data, and it's going to be analyzed and published for us as a system. Excuse me. So some of the research questions that we're asking: where do disparities in student academic and behavioral outcomes exist in our district? That's one of the questions we want to ask. Where do disparities in student participation in state assessments, like maybe AP programming or IB programming or classes, are there disparities that exist in our district in those aspects? And then to what extent over time and at what schools have there been changes over the course of the last 5 to 7 years? Because what we imagine is that we're going to see some bright spots for sure. We're going to see some areas where there have been closing gaps and less disparities. We want to celebrate those too. So our equity dashboard, our initial data has been submitted today. This is going to take about a 2-month process for them to cull through the data. They're likely going to have clarifying questions for us. They're going to need to ask us. So tell us about this data piece and what does this mean? And so we'll have to spend some time, our research and evaluation team, of course, not me, really digging into the methodologies and making sure they have all the data they need to be able to produce this dashboard and scorecard. So we are looking to get the equity dashboard and scorecard by mid-July. So as you can see, we'll have a chunk of data starting to come in around mid to late summer that will help inform some of our work in the fall semester. I wanted to show you just a sample dashboard and what this is going to look like. Of course, this is going to say Arlington ISD. It's going to have key findings, recommendations. Our scorecard will be able to filter by group. And there'll be some frequently asked questions about our specific project with Hanover. So here's an example of how some of the key findings might look. There are consistent opportunity gaps in academic outcomes in the district with these specific student groups: special education, English language learners, Black students, Hispanics, whatever the data might show. They're going to give us some key findings, and they're going to help us kind of walk through this process to learn, understand, and be able to ask questions about the findings. Then from the key findings, they're going to make recommendations. Now, these are just things that we can consider. These are going to be aligned to best practices and research this organization has already engaged in to be able to say, here are some things you might consider. For example, you might consider conducting additional research on how you identify gifted students. If there are disparities that are revealed, here are some things you might be able to consider. So we'll be able to see some concrete recommendations from the team that will give us food for thought and ideas for us to be able to create strategies. As I mentioned, we'll also be able to look at outcomes by student groups. So we'll be able to look at this dashboard. It's going to be live. We can literally click and filter however we want it to look to be able to see what the proficiency has been for all student groups over the course of 5 years in English language arts. We'll be able to see disciplinary incidents for a specific student group over the last 5 to 7 years. So again, a wealth of data for us to be able to cull through, which is the charge with the examination to be able to see where are some of these gaps we might be able to focus on in the next leg of our work. Also, in the first 6 months, benchmarking equity frameworks. And so this is really an exciting part of the process. It's because right now the team is researching. They're researching peer districts that look like us in terms of size, demographic, population, low socioeconomic status, percentage of English learners, all of mobility rate, all those kinds of components they look at. And they're basically saying, hey, so how are your peer districts engaging in this equity work? What are objectives they have? What are some themes they've identified as work they want to engage in? And to what extent possible have they seen success in the outcomes of the work they've put forward? So they're going to produce for us, and we'll get this actually pretty soon, a comprehensive report that will share those best practices. So again, we don't have to start from scratch. If there are people and districts who say, hey, this one has really worked well with us, we struggle with a similar challenge, or this is an area we've continued to see growth, we can actually look at some of those practices and be able to learn from them as well. So again, here are the research questions. It was important that in this process that we knew exactly what we were signing up for. So what research questions do we want to know? We want to know the answer to who are AISD's peers who have exemplary practices as it relates to racial equity plans, policies that they have in their district that we might be able to lean into. What are some core components that are included in these frameworks that also could inform future work in our system as we look at creating equity plans and framework? And then specifically, how are they monitoring progress? How do they know they're being successful? How are they measuring the impact of the goals and strategies that they have for their district? And so we are looking to get that benchmarking equity report here actually in just the next few weeks. So we're looking forward to reading that research report from Hanover. I also just wanted to bring back that we have a lot of people who are highly interested in this work. And so our listening leaders are going to be very instrumental in helping us understand, again, the results from our diagnostic survey. They'll be instrumental in helping us on the ground have conversations one-on-one with people in their department, people at their campus, to be able to, around a standardized set of questions about racial equity. Again, the question stems will come from what we learned that diagnostic survey. So we have 100 listening leaders who are across the district representing all different types of roles and responsibilities, but all very engaged and interested in this work. We have over 160 focus group participants. This is only staff members because we do look to involve community in focus groups as well as student focus groups as well. But we have 160 folks who will participate in at least a 90-minute focus group, again, to explore some of those themes that were outlined or that were discovered in the diagnostic survey. So thought it would be important to just talk about strategic planning because that is coming up here in the next few months and how a lot of this information that we are gaining is going to help inform some of the plan that we have. So our survey and focus groups and listening leaders, of course, will engage in collecting qualitative data about student, staff, and parent experiences. The equity audit is going to be the quantitative analysis of examination of our systems, examination of our programs, disciplinary infractions, et cetera. Our equity frameworks is how they are looking at peer and aspirant districts to be able to find ideas of how we might be able to modify and involve some of those strategies in our district. And all of those will help inform our district planning priorities as we begin strategic planning here in the next few months. So I wanted to end today with a quote by one of our AISD teachers of 17 years. She said, "Our racial equity work will improve relationships among teachers, students, and parents, and improve the educational experience of all of our students with an emphasis on leveling the playing field for Black students and people of color." So with that, that is the update on where we are with our racial and social equity work, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. Do I have any questions or comments from trustees? Yes, Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. Back to the equity audit and the dashboard and scorecard, that section. Let me set up. In some of our elementary schools, we have special behavioral programs of small groups of students with qualified, experienced teachers for that sort of delivery of instruction and help for those kids. My question is, how will a campus, how will this dashboard or comparison work out between the campuses for campuses that have that sort of behavioral program and those that don't? As far as, I'm thinking discipline specifically.
Okay, so the dashboard is going to be a district level, system level dashboard. So that means it's not going to be like individual campuses will not have their own dashboard. We'll be able to filter it as a system, but the research is going to be able to take into account just the number of infractions. Disciplinary infractions is going to be one, referrals, and I understand you're probably saying there may be some campuses that have more evidence of challenges than others. And we just look to see that in the data and be able to filter through that and make sense of it.
Yeah, well, I read it was by school site, so I was assuming, so.
Meaning that we can filter by school site.
Right.
So we'll be able to say, okay, Adams Elementary, for example, we can see all the data in terms of equity, the dashboard for that particular school. And we can make comparisons to say, well, how does Adams look as it relates to, let's say, disciplinary infraction versus Fitzgerald? So we can make those side-by-side comparisons.
Right.
Mhm.
But also taking into account and filtering by maybe a special program on that campus. I'm asking this as a question. Would there be a special filter for a campus who held one of those special behavioral programs?
So we'll be able to filter by program, and so that will involve
Okay.
some of the situations that you're mentioning.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Walton. Mrs. Fowler?
Thank you, President Mays. Dr. Brown, so we send out all the surveys, we have the listening groups, we have the focus groups, we gather all this information. Then what?
That's a great question, Ms. Fowler.
You know,
it just depends on the data, right? What I will tell you is part of the partnership that we have with this organization is they are experienced in being able to dig into this data and help us identify themes. So we're going to work side by side with them in workshops, which is what I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We'll be engaged in workshops to really be able to dig into to where we're not having surface level experiences with the data, but we're able to dig deeper and say, this is a real issue that we might need to tackle. What's important to think about with this particular organization is, again, this is a multi-step process. The root cause analysis comes after that. So yes, we have the data, but digging into the root cause analysis is a whole nother process to make sure that we're identifying the right strategy to tackle. So Dr. Cavazos has been very clear in making sure that we're not just jumping to reaction mode to find strategies, but to really pull through the data, do root cause analysis, engage in listening tours to make sure we're tackling the right strategy.
That's right, and I want to make sure that with the information that we gather, that it's not just left. Use that and do something with it within the schools or the district as a whole. And I think that's going to be important, to do the surveys and do all of that, but then the follow through, what needs to be done maybe at each campus or different campuses. And I think that's the important part.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely concur.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Fowler. Do I have any other trustees with questions or comments? Yes, Dr. Reich?
Thank you, President Mays, and thank you for the information. It's going to be good work to do a deep dive across the entire district. One of my questions is on the listening leaders and the stakeholders. What does that look like as far as the profile of the participants? Is there a breakdown of X number of different race, culture types, and is that something that we can see? I'm just curious. I would assume the goal is that it's pretty balanced representative of our population, but was curious about that.
Yes, it's a great question. It was important to us that we had a diverse representation to engage in this work, and we had diverse interest in this work. So not only diversity in terms of their role and their responsibilities in the district, but also diversity in racial, ethnic makeup, as well as experience. So we certainly can provide that information to you for focus groups, listening leaders, task force. All that information can be provided to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. And as far as the listening leaders, I think you mentioned that there would be community listening leaders in there as well. So can you define that a little bit more for me and how those individuals are identified?
Yeah, so we haven't quite gotten to that part yet.
Okay,
We're focusing
okay.
just on the internal
Okay.
parents and our student focus groups, but we certainly are just going to engage in those conversations. We've already had some initial conversations about what that could look like. But again, we want a diverse representation, just like we have with our internal focus groups and listening leaders as well. And we're working to, to work that out to determine who that's going to be
Okay.
in the coming probably couple of months.
Okay, great. And what about outside contractors, vendors, those external groups that we work with. I mean, obviously, the focus is within the school system itself, but I know as trustees, we interact with the community. We do interact with potential vendors, and I'd be curious to know if this work will branch into that, or is that a completely separate thing that we're not doing right now, or considering, I guess?
So what exactly are you saying in terms of branch out into the?
So into our contracting process, policies, just to make sure that they also are representative of like an equity lens and that type of thing. So different than our internal as far as our staff and student experience, but more so what that looks like outwardly.
Sure.
So I think it's primarily focused, and I'm going to refer back to the resolution to make sure we have fidelity to it, but culture, curriculum, instruction, and internal systems. So as much as an internal system such as hiring, recruitment, retention, leadership development, I mean, you can go down the list of internal systems, purchasing, et cetera. That we commit to examining that as well, but it's primarily focused on within the district, but the system, so I think captures what you're describing, Dr. Resch. And just to be clear, that is lofty and very comprehensive.
Right.
So it doesn't happen overnight to examine the systems and the structures and the culture and the curriculum, the instruction. But this is the launch of that work. And so I do anticipate that in this listening leaders, for example, that we talked about, that we're going to invite individuals. You know, we would make that opportunity for board members or others who want to engage with us in partnership in this listening tour, if you will, listening leaders, so that everybody gets a full kind of breadth of what we're hearing and amassing within the district. To Ms. Fowler's point, the challenge, but I think it's measured, right, is then we have to have action. So what we discover, right, deals with strategy and action that comes after that. But to answer your question, there will be, I think, an opportunity for those internal systems. But it's launching first with mostly the culture, I think, is what we're dealing with right now. We'll look at instruction, curriculum, et cetera.
Okay, very good. And I know this is a long ways away, but as far as curriculum and things, we're not, we're still defined by the state as far as the TEKS. Everything that we're going to do, if there's anything regarding curriculum, it is not going to be it will remain in alignment with what our state standards are. And unless the state changes something, we're sticking with that, right?
So in essence, yes, I think where we talk about curriculum specifically are course offerings, perhaps that are available through state-approved course offerings that perhaps we haven't offered because either interest or examination, et cetera. We offer a lot of courses, and I would venture to say we offer probably everything that the state allows us to offer, if you will. But I do think that just like special study pathways that we have at the Career Tech Center, for example, may be a variation of what the state allows, but can we put a pathway together? As one example, it's just but to your point, with the essential knowledge and skills with what the state standards are. But can we frame it in a way that it becomes a course of study, for example, that you can begin perhaps at junior high and then into high school? State-approved courses, right?
Yep.
But a course of study that we don't really frame that way right now. We kind of say, well, you can take that elective, you can take that elective, but could we amass a group of courses? I think that's more the examination in the curriculum. Last piece on that is also looking at how we source out curriculum material and things like that. Again, all of those are, for the most part, state mandated, state approved, et cetera.
Right.
But making sure that they're available. That's probably another piece of the curriculum, is to what extent are resources available, again, state approved, et cetera. But have we taken advantage of the availability of resources across our district, right? That's an examination. we do have a lot of resources, but have we taken advantage of everything that's available based on the feedback we receive? Because the feedback is going to drive a lot of this, right? In terms of to what level is the curriculum matching the needs, right? Within what's available. I think that's
that
how I address it.
addresses it very well. Thank you.
Thank you,
And thank you for all the work with this. Looking forward to the results step by step as we move through this process. So thank you very much.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rush. I don't see any other lights. Dr. Brown, thank you very much for this presentation. Okay, Mr. Chapa. Oh, I rejected you on accident. Thank you. Mr. Chapa.
Thank you, President Mays. I just wanted to say briefly that I appreciate the qualitative and quantitative aspects that it looks like this equity review is going to encompass. You know, we've seen, I think, a lot of organizations over the last year or so take steps to do something similar. And, you know, different organizations handle things in different ways, but I think that among the ones I've seen, this is very thoughtful. It's very deliberate. It is on a longer timeline than some other organizations have done, but I think a result of that is going to be that this is going to be not only much more thorough, but the data-driven approach that's going to be used is going to give us much more actionable items to consider on the back end. And I think the change that will come from this approach, I hope, will be much more effective and deliberate than some of the other reviews that I've seen and the outcomes there. So thank you again. I really appreciate your staff and the thoughtfulness that went into this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chapa. Once again, Dr. Brown, thank you very much for the presentation that you gave this evening. I like how you're delivering it in a way of here's what we do first steps and next steps in a situation like this, I don't think can be derived until we finish those first steps. It's hard to have a conversation and fix things until you really understand the root of everything that needs to be involved. So to Justin's point, appreciate the strategic way that we're going about this. In addition to that, you know, I know that the resolution that we all voted on was not to appease anybody or anything, but it is to make the culture of AISD better for our students, a better place for our employees to be, a way to help our students become better citizens, and a way to also help our students and staff and all of us within the community look within ourselves and see the positive things that we all have. So once again, I appreciate that. I had two questions. One, the survey, how exactly will it be administered, and will there be any parental permissions for any of this?
Yes, so the survey is going to be sent out in-house. So district, we will send it out to our people, to parents, to our staff members, and to students. They'll have a 2-week window to be able to complete the survey. At this point, we have not finalized all the details as to whether or not there will be parent permission, or if we'll share the questions ahead of time so parents know what questions are coming. We're still working through some of those details.
Okay, very good. And then my second question was, do you mind just maybe sharing a little bit of what some of the hopes and the fears were that were discussed? I really would like to just hear just a summary. You don't have to give me all of them, but.
Yes, Dr. C, do you want to say that? Share.
Well, so yes, we had this, we tried this activity. It's a brief activity, but it's a powerful one actually, with different groups. And we think that we want to use this activity with some of our listening leaders, et cetera, because it really is powerful. And so some of it draws on experiences and things like that. But everybody got to share who wanted to share, because that's how we framed a lot of this work. What are those hopes and what are those fears, right? And so if I had to summarize, they were probably, interestingly enough, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, because you were there, obviously, but they were, interestingly enough, the hope was to some extent, the same fear on the opposite end. So the hope is that this work is persistent, courageous, and makes a difference. And the fear, if you will, that's how we framed it, fear may be a strong word, is that it's not persistent, or it won't be courageous, and it won't make too much of a difference. And I think when we reflected on that, individuals found that really, they kind of saw it, that was the hope, and at the same time, that was the fear. And it's not just our organization, let me be clear. This is true of organizations across this country that are dealing with this type of work. Because there's certain, to Mr. Chapa's point, there's certain maybe unaware tendencies, like go fix something and go do it fast, right? Or bring back, the 3 things we're gonna do with this work. And because that's so built into a lot of systems, we wanna guard against that, right? We wanna guard against that. We want to make sure we examine, just like the board resolution says, an examination, and then to Ms. Fowler's point, then action, right? But that's a discipline. So that was another hope and fear. Hope that we really take the examination deep enough that it informs the action, right? The fear is the opposite, that the examination won't be deep enough and we're gonna rush to action, right? Because that sometimes is not just Arlington, but it's a tendency of organizations because we want to fix things. That's what we do. So that was an interesting dichotomy. We weren't expecting that, at least I wasn't expecting that kind of dichotomy. I thought there'd be nicely bundled hopes and nicely bundled fears. But it turns out that those 2 things are opposite or different ends of the coin or whatever, opposite sides of the coin. So that's what we learned. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Tracy.
Just to add on to the hope part, of course, all the things, the aspirational organization we hope to be better than we are even now. And I think the fears is that when you're asking people to do a self-examination, there is a heightened awareness and sensitivity with that. So that the fear is that it might become so messy and uncomfortable that we decide this is probably too much. And we are all committed to not getting to that space. And so as I mentioned before, when we know that's the greatest fear, how are we being proactive to ensure those things don't come to fruition?
And you shared with administrative team today, principals and all over the district, it's a ILA, all the administrators basically. I shared that even asking the questions, that's why we talk about this survey and we take our time with making sure people understand what the survey is, draws some reflection, an important piece to this, right? But even asking questions draws reflection. And we want to be mindful of that and give people space and give people an option. If they're not ready to reflect to that level, then that's going to be their choice as well. So, long answer to your question of hope and fears, but that was what we discovered.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's very interesting. So my hope is that the fears don't come true.
Yes.
And then just 2 more small things that I would just really like to say because I'm very excited about this work that's being done. Kind of pivoting a little bit off of what Dr. Reich said, the hope from this resolution was that once we do the deep dive and we are able to make some changes in culture, that then it impacts some of the other things that you were talking about on the outside of how we interact with other individuals, other things. You hope that once we do the deep dive that we start stirring up that thirst of knowledge for the things that we've been hiding from, and we're hoping that that comes out of this. So the last thing I just want to say is, isn't it very interesting that when we try to find one area, certain group of people, or a certain program that needs some improvement, it can still only be done by a diverse participation. It doesn't come from that same one group. So we're going to have to all be together. So you mentioned that diverse participation, and I think that's very, very, very strong. So thank you once again for your presentation. Really appreciate it, Dr. Brown.
Thank you.
Okay, next thing on our agenda is open forum for non-agenda items. As shared before, all persons in attendance are required to wear a mask. Speakers who are addressing the board in person, please keep your mask on. Thank you. Mrs. Benjamin, do we have requesters registered to address the board regarding non-agenda items?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Keppel is registered to speak regarding non-agenda items.
Okay. Well, welcome, Mr. Kevel. The second open forum segment of the meeting provides citizens with an opportunity to address the trustees on any subject except personnel. And this is not intended to be a discussion or a debate, and trustees will not reply to the speaker. Derogatory comments aimed at an individual will not be tolerated, and you will have 5 minutes to speak. Mrs. Benjamin will notify you when your time is up, and at that time, please end your presentation. Mr. Kevel, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Phil Kevel, and I just want to thank all the board members for staying up late and giving me this platform. I know you're tired. The ayes go first. I have lived here in Arlington for over 70 years. I still live here. I plan to live here forever. So I just want to say I went through the Arlington school system. I went to C.B. Berry Elementary. I went to Ferguson Junior High School. When I was in the 8th grade, that was the year integration occurred. So I've got a lot of history here. I graduated from Sam Houston High School. I graduated after that from UTA and worked in Fort Worth basically my whole life. My wife taught in the Arlington ISD for 30 years. And she's a very popular, very, very good teacher. So, you know, she's retired now. And I have 5 great nieces that are like my kids. 2 just recently graduated. They went to the Arlington schools. And 3 are still in the Arlington ISD currently. And so I say all that because what I want is what is best for Arlington. I mean, I have nexus here. I've been here forever. And I love Arlington, and I appreciate what all you guys have done and are doing. It's hard work. And I've never spoken to the board. This is the first time. But a disturbing education trend is occurring in the United States. And I'm here to discuss critical race theory. And I know, once again, after what we just heard, it's a difficult subject. And what she's proposing is groups and discussions and making things better. And I mean, yeah, boy, that sounds great. This is not what this is. This is something that you're teaching the kids, okay? So if I can just give you a quick definition. Critical race theory claims that everything in Western society is irredeemably tainted by the bigotry of whiteness. Hence, all of our institutions, including schools, and traditions are irreparably polluted by past and continuing institutional racism. Remediation isn't sufficient. Mitigation only puts a bandage on the cancer. The only true cure is to demolish everything that has come before and rebuild from the ground up along anti-racist lines. Critical race theory is the opposite of diversity and tolerance. It's a bitter movement bent on vengeance against everything branded white. So, I mean, I could talk all night about what critical race theory is. It's divisive, it's discriminatory, it's damaging, it's subversive, it's insidious, and it destroys the cohesiveness of our nation, what we're trying to do. I think the emphasis needs to be on the Constitution, our Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, where it says, all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you read the Constitution and all these documents, nowhere in there does it say, the words appear, it says black, white, race, female, slave. It's all people is what they address. The 14th Amendment says you cannot deny any person in the U.S. equal protection of the laws. And that's where we are. That's the country we want to be. That's the country we are in. And so I could talk, at length about the extreme damage which would result by injecting critical race theory into our schools, but time constraints prohibit me from doing that. But I'm here to ask if any of you on the current school board endorse critical race theory and want it taught in our schools, which is being done nationwide in a lot of school districts. And secondly, do you promise to maintain vigilance against any individual school or teacher teaching critical race theory in Arlington schools? And so, I'm not trying to be confrontational here, but we just need to oppose every aspect of racism wherever it exists. And once again, I'll go back to 1965 when we had first integration. I played basketball. We had the black guys came in, and we had the same coaches. We played with them. I mean, there wasn't anything. It all went quite well. We're in the same schools. We had the same teachers. I didn't see any issues at all. So I'm proud of that. I was part of that, and I'm proud of that. But promoting critical race theory just promotes racism, and it's something that I don't want to see in our schools. And I'd love to talk to anyone about this, and I would ask that you would not allow that to be in our schools.
Thank you, Mr. Calvin. Okay, next on our agenda is our superintendent's report.
Thank you.
Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Mays. And so I have been spending this time of the report just thanking individuals. So I just briefly want to thank all the faculty, the staff, and the students of Webb Elementary. We were able to join the groundbreaking ceremony for the rebuilding of Webb, the new Webb. And in that thank you, I thank the voters as well, because they supported a bond program that allowed that to happen, so that we are able to rebuild aging and aged facilities like Webb. Webb used to be a junior high. It's been an elementary for a number of years. Space is not the most conducive for modern learning, if you will. But I will tell you the kids at that school, when we were in the groundbreaking, were exceptional. And I want to thank them. In particular, the students that helped in the design of the new Webb. They were very active, and they were very persistent in telling me this is what we wanted at the school, and I'm glad we were getting a new school. But I appreciate Kelly Horn and others in leadership who included students in the charrettes and the design initial process, because that left an impact, and that those students will never forget that they helped design something that will be here for hopefully another 50 years when it's a brand new school, right? And so I'm just proud of them and proud of our teachers for their dedication this year. And so that's the thank you I have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cavazos. Are there any trustees with any reports this evening? Yes, Ms. Fowler?
Thank you, President Mays. I wanted to congratulate Mr. Atman, the sponsor at Martin High School, for his academic teams. 2 of those teams are headed to state, and I think that is just amazing. So to Mr. Atman and Martin High School academic teams, we're proud of you, and our fingers are crossed for you as you move to state.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Any other trustees with reports? Yes, Ms. Walton?
President Mays, well, I just want to give a shout out to ROARC. We were there earlier this week for a great assembly. The ROARC kids and staff were so responsive to a Medal of Honor winner, a national Medal of Honor gentleman, Captain Roberg. And shout out to the General Motors plant who helped bring him here, and our soon to have museum for the Medal of Honor winners. And I was talking to Jeannie DeKine today, and she is vice president of that endeavor, and they are hoping to break ground in August on the museum. So I thought, I don't know if I can hold her to that, but that's exciting if that happens. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Educational opportunities. Thank you, Ms. Walton. Don't see lights for any other trustees? Okay. Mrs. Secretary, do we have any items to consider?
Yes, we do. We have 3. The first one is a question, since most of our students, more of our students have returned to our campuses for on-campus instruction, could we get a report of how this has impacted grades, hopefully in a improved nature? And it was indicated this could happen at the end of the third week of this 6 weeks when progress reports come out. 2, the question was how many students at Sam Houston have returned as of the beginning of the 6 weeks. I believe that was the time period. Is that correct? Thank you, Ms. Fallon. And the third one was when we received the April 30th TAD report, Tarrant County Appraisal District report, could the revenue be broken out by 2 categories, residential and commercial revenues?
Thank you very much, Ms. Secretary. Okay, it is 10:32, and this meeting is adjourned.